Good day, everyone. Welcome to Deku Universe. Today we are beginning part 1 of What If Deku Had the 7 Deadly Sins powers. The fanfiction is created by Ninj45 Word on archive of ourown.org. Now let's begin. The first thing that came to Izuku's sense of smell was the complete lack of smoke. Opening his eyes lethargically on a large field of grass nearly as green as his eyes, the young boy slowly sat upright in the open field. He rubbed his eyes as he stared at the surrounding area with a confusion that bordered on worry as he glanced around the field of grass surrounding him from all sides. Looking toward the sky, he finds that it is slightly cloudy with the sun shining brightly high over a large kingdom in the distance, though the last time he'd seen a kingdom was in a storybook as a child. Stumbling into a standing position and stretching his limbs, he tries to get a handle of his situation. Muttering about the possible areas of his world he could be before he feels a strange sensation under his skin. It's not strong enough to be brought out, but it's there. Izuku doesn't know what it is, but he knows for a fact that it is highly important for his future survival in this place. Not that he knows exactly where he is. Izuku doesn't know where he is, nor where he will head from this point onward. All he knows is that he died, or he thinks he did, but on his mind right now is to check this new place out. I've never seen a castle before, Izuku mumbled before moving in the direction of the kingdom. For what felt like hours, Izuku walked through the massive fields of grass, even coming across a few people who were moving some of their quarry of grain and cattle across the large field he was moving through. Deciding to take a detour, he helps the civilians around the area with their normal chores and earning a strange currency, gold and silver. Izuku knows for a fact that the currency he should be using is yen, something exclusive to the Japanese island off of China's watery border. Thinking about which places in history have ever used gold or silver as currency, he was distracted by the sound of someone calling for help. Rushing to see what was going on, Izuku's legs moved on their own. By the time he arrived around the corner, somehow, he'd reached a small village. He found himself staring at a tall man, wearing armor, pointing a blade at one of the people. His face was covered by a helmet that made him look very intimidating to the young man, and he was constantly thrusting it towards the elderly woman who was stumbling backwards as he continued to move the weapon. Not even thinking about the ramifications of his action, Izuku rushed towards the elderly woman. As the elderly woman was about to be stabbed by the weapon, she was shoved out of the way. Izuku stood in the elderly woman's place as he caught the blade between his arm and torso, his arm holding in place under his pit. The armored individual glared down at Izuku as the young boy held onto the blade, the elderly woman behind him staring at him in awe before Izuku called out to the knight. "I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm pretty sure a knight shouldn't treat their people like nothing," Izuku called out, glaring at the knight. "Whoever said that you could protect the weak?" "Well," the knight called out, trying to yank his blade from Izuku's pit. Izuku could feel a sharp pain in the area beneath his shoulder, right in his pit, but he held onto the blade. Within moments, with a strength he didn't know he even had, Izuku yanked the weapon from the knight's grasp, causing the people in the village to let out a gasp of shock. And in those few moments, the knight was yanked from his horse as it ran off towards the nearby stables, as Izuku grabbed the weapon itself, stumbling due to its heavy weight. As the knight prepared to stand back upright, he found the blade right at his throat. Though the blade itself was trembling, he could feel it barely touch his neck from under his helmet. "I won't say it again. Whatever you were trying to get from her, you should forget it," Izuku tried to confidently state. "Who's to say that you will even swing that blade, boy?" the knight questioned, tilting their helmeted head. "Who says that I won't swing the blade? You don't know me, sir," Izuku retorted, his hands trembling the longer he held the blade like this. Well played. I surrender myself to this village, though I must say you have some confidence to place a holy knight under arrest," the man said, before disappearing from Izuku's sight. The people in the village stared in shock as the man appeared behind Izuku, his blade back in his hand. It was here that Izuku felt the blade's sharp edge against the side of his neck, and sweat began to fall down the side of his face. Izuku glanced over his shoulder to look at the individual behind him as they took off their helmet, revealing a head of hair that was white as snow and eyes that were as serious as the man who told him his dreams were nothing more than asinine. In this moment, Izuku felt as though everything was about to end for him. Again. And not again. I can't die like this again. Izuku thought to himself, unknowingly muttering this aloud. Die again? Whatever are you talking about, boy? The man asked, tilting his head. Lyonesse, great Holy Knight Zaratros' home. It had been more than a few hours since Zaratros had come to the village to get information about a rival faction. He had been only asking as kindly as possible if there was a demon. He hadn't expected one of the inhabitants to be one who had experienced death before. Not only that, but he was intrigued by how the boy was actually capable of yanking his blade from his terrifying grip. For a boy who looked so much as a mere brush of wind could knock him over, he was deceptively stronger than he looked. Though, that brought the man to begin thinking about the words the boy muttered under his breath. The boy was currently sleeping on a couch within his home. His son was looking over the boy's health. And while Zaratros had a strange feeling that this boy could use mana, he knew for a fact that this boy was not familiar with the area. Mainly because, for one, it was extremely rare for one to have green hair, more so for the shade of green that he had for his hair, especially. As for his emerald-colored eyes, he had a feeling that it was passed down through genetics, but that didn't explain why the boy had muttered about dying again. And not again. I can't die like this again. The boy's voice rang in his mind. How did you die? And more importantly, what is the reason you have been brought to our kingdom? Zaratros muttered to himself. Father, the boy. He's slowly waking. Zaratros' son called out. I'll be there in a moment, son. I need to filter through my thoughts right now. Zaratros called back as his son ran off. That was his son, Gilthunder, a boy who he was currently raising on his own. He had the same affinity for lightning like he did. Though he didn't really train as much as he should, he did focus most of his time spending it with one of the princesses of Lyonesse. Zaratros loved his son. He was the last thing his beloved wife gave him before leaving for the afterlife. And he couldn't stand every waking moment without her. He'd think of what his late wife would tell him after everything that has happened since her untimely death at the hands of a stray demon. Taking a deep breath, Zaratros left the kitchen and entered the living room. The boy from the village, whose name he didn't know yet, was seen glancing around the area from where he sat on the couch. He didn't make an attempt to flee. That was good since he didn't want to chase after the boy. Walking into view so the boy could see him fully, he watched as the boy suddenly became alert around him. His hands trembled at his hips as though he were mentally preparing to use a magical spell he'd learned in his time under whoever taught him that deceptive strength he had. Hello there, young man. My name is Zaratros, and I am the great Holy Knight of Lyonesse. Can I have your name? Zaratros asked, giving a small bow. Emideria Izuku, sir. Izuku replied, though his tone was filled with worry. Now then, I only have a couple questions I'd like to ask you, if that's all right. Zaratros said, as Izuku nodded. What do you need to know, sir? Izuku asked, concerned. Why did you make the comment about dying again? Are you in TMT with death as a whole? Zaratros asked, sitting in a chair across from Izuku. When he sat down, he watched the boy's body language slowly lower its guard. He was more afraid of the man when he was standing in a position of power. It was like talking to a small animal for the great Holy Knight. But as soon as his question was asked, he watched the boy's guard raise up incrementally more as he tried to think about how to answer the question. If there was one thing Zaratros would commend the boy on, it was how he was thinking before speaking, which was a good thing to see in one of the youth of today. They could be quite rude with their motor mouths. I'm not even sure where I am right in now. Can you tell me where I am exactly? Izuku asked, completely ignoring the man's title. I already told you. I am the great Holy Knight for the Kingdom of Lyonesse. You are in the country of Britannia. Zaratros said, as Izuku's expression paled. Britannia? What is that? Izuku asked, confused. Surely you jest. Britannia is the country of which you have been born. There is no way you wouldn't know of Britannia as a whole, much less the Kingdom of Lyonesse. Zaratros said, chuckling a little. When Izuku didn't give a reply at that, The man couldn't help but feel a bead of sweat fall down the side of his face. Then Izuku spoke up, his voice a little quiet, but at the same time loud enough for Zaratros to hear how low the tone was. If this isn't Mizuki-fun, I truly did die, and I'm in another world. Izuku muttered, his hands looking for something to write down. Zaratros noticed how his hands were actively mimicking the action of writing something down. So he left the room and grabbed a piece of parchment and a feather pen to see what the boy would begin to write on the parchment. By the time he came back with both, he found the boy still muttering to himself before handing over the parchment and feather pen to see what he would write. Imagine his surprise at how his words were completely written in such a different form of speech that he'd never seen the language before. Young man, for which land do you hail? Zaratros asked, speaking loud enough to break the boy out of his musings. I don't think I belong here, sir, Izuku called out suddenly. Kingdom of Lyonesse, 1 week later. It had been a full week since Izuku had come to this strange country/world. In the time that he found out that the place he now inhabited was completely different from the world he used to live in, he made extra sure to inform the man who had taken him in about everything. To say that Zaratros was shocked by how Izuku came to this world was unfathomable, and the way he hugged Izuku for experiencing such an action made him nearly cry. But over the time that Zaratros allowed Izuku to stay within his home, Izuku made sure that he was seen to be very capable of helping around the place. He did the laundry, cleaned dishes, and many more, all to make himself appear as useful as possible. In the world he once lived in, he was viewed as nothing more than useless and trash to be walked around. In this world, he wanted everyone to see him as useful and friendly as possible. He will not make the same mistakes he had in his world, that he really knew of, because he doesn't want to be lonely in a world where, strangely, magic was very similar to quirks. And boy, wasn't that a strange conversation to have with Zaratros over the past week, as the man took in any and all information Izuku had on his world. It was pretty jarring for Izuku, since realizing that quirks were very similar to quirks. It made him hope he had some form of magic himself. If he couldn't become a hero in his reality, maybe he could become the equivalent of a hero in this one. Though, looking at it roughly from an outside perspective, Izuku realized that he'd need to work his body to the very limit in order to attain that status as a hero. Looking at the window as he did some dishes, cleaning them since Zaratros and his son loved to eat large quantities of food, he watched the two of them sparring with one another. While the son, Gilthunder, was highly agile, he was nothing compared to the speed of his father. In what Izuku perceived as barely even a microsecond, the father would block the high-speed blows his son would swing his bakken at him at. It was very impressive for a boy who was nearing the age of 8 to be as fast as he was, and that was saying something for Izuku, who had seen an 8-year-old move far faster. He won't state who was faster than Gilthunder, but all he will say was that the boy he's thinking of moved at a faster pace than the current 8-year-old. Exiting the house, he moved towards the two's training ground. Dust was picking up in the air as the two increased the speed at which they were swinging their wooden blades towards one another. By the time Izuku called out to the two of them, he had watched them clash their blades, and the wood was grinding against one another, creating a sliding, crunching sound. "Ichie, see, can I ask something of you both?" Izuku asked, looking to the two of them. "What do you need, young man?" Zaratros asked, looking away from the training whilst holding his son off. "See, can you teach me how to be a Holy Knight?" Izuku asked, looking to the two of them. "I can have a sparring partner," Gilthunder said, a smile on his face. "I don't know. He'll need to learn how to wield a blade. Not only that, but we'll need to figure out what kind of magic he'd excel at," Zaratros said, looking worried. "I'll do anything in order to achieve my dream of being a hero." "Anything," Izuku said, looking to the man with hope in his eyes. "Young man, why are you looking at me with such hope in your eyes? The only way to become a hero is through hard work and dedication, not the permission of others," Zaratros said impulsively. For a moment, Izuku didn't say a single word, though Gilthunder noticed tears were gathering in the young man's eyes. Tilting his head in confusion, Both father and son would watch as this 14-year-old boy would fall to the ground holding his chest as though it were in pain. The two rushed over to make sure that Izuku wasn't in pain, only to find the boy crying in joy as he softly pushed his forehead into the ground before speaking to the two of them. Thank you. Thank you so much," Izuku whispered as the father and son duo blinked in confusion. 3 years later, Izuku could be seen training in the open field with his newly created blade by the blacksmith. The blade he was using was made exactly as how he wanted it to be. Created, it was a long blade with a small circular pommel that surrounded the blade itself near the handle. He swung the blade in wide arcs, flames bursting from the blade itself and dancing around him as he moved in precise arcs and maneuvers, sliding across the grass of the very same field he'd come to this world within. Izuku found himself soon swinging his blade in a wide arc through the air, creating a large slice through the air of flames. "Solar Strike," Izuku mumbled, as the slice in the air pushed through the air. For a few meters the slice powered through the air before he heard a familiar sound across the very same field. Full counter! His very own Solar Strike was blasted back towards him with double the power he'd used when creating it. Izuku then powered his blade up as high as he could, the weapon glowing an emerald green hue before he swung his blade in the direction of the powerful flaming slash coming to him. As soon as his sacred treasure slammed into the slashing flames, he let out a grunt of effort before hearing the voice call out to him from the left. A small figure with a strange set of armor could be seen holding a blade that was smaller than his own, but it was vastly more powerful in his hands. In order to use full counter to the best of your ability, you need to let the magic of the attack be absorbed into your body. Then you can release it all within a singular strike. The familiar but young voice chirped to his left. "Solar counter," Izuku called out. Absorbing the flames into his body, Izuku swung his blade downward, causing the slicing air attack to be blasted back. Panting heavily from even using the magical counter spell, Izuku fell to a knee as he tore off the helmet he was wearing. He stabbed his blade into the ground as its golden-green appearance slowly stopped glowing its emerald hue as Izuku glanced to his left as the figure took off their helmet. They had a small head of hair that was golden yellow with hundreds of curls that were curling in opposing directions, with an ahog hanging on top of his head, constantly twitching. For your first time Ember, you weren't half bad. It's only a matter of time before you fully learn full counter and make it your own spell. The voice chirped again as Izuku smiled at the individual. "Thank you, Sir Meliodas. It's been a long 3 years of training under Sir Zaratros. He's done so much for me and Gilthunder, and I don't know how I could possibly thank him, Gil, and you for helping me learn," Izuku said, smiling at the diminutive man. "Don't worry. Just make sure to be the best hero that you want to become. Only then will you become a legend like the Sins," Meliodas said, chuckling. The two looked over towards where the kingdom of Lyonesse was slowly expanding. Izuku stood upright once more, the armor he wore looking more akin to that of the armor that he'd learned about the Japanese historical samurai. By the time he was standing at full height, he was at least a full head over Meliodas, who smirked at him before taking in his armor and questioning it. "I've never seen armor like this before. Where'd you get it created?" Meliodas asked, poking the armor itself. "The blacksmith had smelted it. I just provided the way it could be made to better fit me," Izuku said, walking down the path with Meliodas following after him. "Where did you learn about that kind of armor, though? You look really tough wearing it," Meliodas asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "It comes from a land that is far outside of Britannia. It's actually where I originally came from, though it's long lost to me," Izuku said, staring at the setting sun in the distance. "Oh well, I got to meet up with the Sins. See you later, Ember," Meliodas called out, rushing away. Izuku smiled as the small knight rushed away towards a group of people standing on a nearby hill. Izuku took this time to move towards the building where great Holy Knight Zaratros would be sitting and completing menial tasks set up by the king of Lyonesse. It was a relatively quiet afternoon, and by the time he reached the building, Izuku would notice that the sky all around himself would be entirely reaching dusk. Entering the building, Izuku would feel a strange sense of danger surrounding the halls of the great Holy Knight Zaratros. That sense of danger continued to grow as he ran through the halls before stopping before a large room. Moving towards the entrance, Izuku would find himself staring at what could only be a sight that would have placed him in high amounts of danger had he spoke. Against the wall, bleeding from wounds caused by clearly an ambush attack from the two individuals in the room, was Zaratros. The man was bleeding incredibly fast in a way that didn't look very healthy in Izuku's eyes. He didn't even know what to do as the man stared at the two holy knights who stood in front of him. Isn't that Holy Knight Hendrickson and Dreyfus? What are they doing here? And why are they standing in front of Zaratros like that? Izuku thought, watching the two continue to talk in a tone he couldn't hear. For a long while the two would seemingly talk to the dead body of Zaratros, and Izuku couldn't help but swallow subconsciously. Instantly, he moved away from the area, remembering the faces that Hendrickson and Dreyfus would have at the sight of Zaratros being dead against the wall with spears pressed into his body from all sides. Tears fell down his face as he rushed down the hall and disappearing around the corner in his way to find Gilthunder. Though while he was gone, the 7 deadly sins would arrive at the building where Izuku had just left, only to find the great Holy Knight killed. While Izuku was searching for Gilthunder, the 7 deadly sins would be blamed for the death of Zaratros, and therefore called out as traitors of the kingdom of Lyonesse, all with a bounty on their head for killing the great Holy Knight Zaratros. And over the course of the next decade, Izuku would train himself alongside Gilthunder, all in the name of making sure that Zaratros' death would be avenged. Though it was also during that time he was assigned as Princess Elizabeth's royal guard, just to protect her from any form of enemies from within and outside of the castle. 10 years later, 2 figures could be seen running through the hidden passageways of the castle. A young woman with long, silver-white hair and a knight covered head to toe in strange Japanese-styled armor. The young knight made sure to keep his charge safe from any of the holy knights who would appear before him in order to capture the princess from his grasp. After dealing with those holy knights, he arrived in front of a large set of armor before helping the princess within the armor as a whole, making sure to keep her vision safe from within the armor itself. Princess, I will not be capable of following you out of the castle. If you encounter any holy knights, I will be there to hold them off, but by the time you leave the kingdom, I will most probably have been caught. Ember's voice strongly called out. But what about your safety? The princess asked, fear in her tone. I'll be fine. My job is to keep you safe. By placing you in this armor, you will be protected from all forms of harm. Trust me, I know that you are scared right now, but if I am able to escape the kingdom myself, I shall join you on your journey to find the 7 deadly sins. Ember said, placing his RBB/Greaves on the princess's shoulders. Where will I even find them? The princess asked, concern in her tone. You will find them. It doesn't have to be very long. It could be a long time. If I am able to escape Lyonesse myself, I will assist you in finding the sins. I just need time to create a diversion. Ember said, as the princess nodded. What will the signal be? The princess asked. You'll know it when you see it, Ember said, before rushing off in another direction from the princess. Using the armor to hide her appearance, the princess moved throughout the streets of Lyonesse, hiding in the small alleyways that the armor could fit within and moving all towards the exit of the kingdom where a large portion of the holy knights resided. As that was happening, Ember was moving through the main streets to garner attention from any nearby holy knights and stopping in a large open area within the kingdom. He didn't want to hurt any civilians, seeing as how they had done nothing wrong to him nor the princess. So he made sure to have the civilians evacuate the area. By the time he stood in a wide open area, he watched as hundreds of holy knights gathered around him. And what hurt his heart the most was how a knight wearing blue and silver armor stood at the front of them, his blue eyes staring daggers into Ember's emerald through his armor. The man pointed his blade at Ember and called out to him with a tone that was holding back their own form of hurt towards the holy knight. After everything my father and myself did to train you, do you really intend to betray all our ideals? Gilthunder's voice called out, glaring at Ember. You are the one betraying your father's ideals, Gilthunder. I am only doing what His Majesty told me to do, and I am fulfilling that job to the fullest. Ember growled back, raising his blade. Don't even attack. We have you surrounded. Gilthunder roared. The only person who is surrounded is you, my old friend, Ember said, before swinging his blade in a wide arc. Flare! Izuku called out, his blade shining a bright emerald red light. Across the kingdom, near the only exit to the place the princess noticed a large green and red light. Thinking that this was her chance to leave, she rushed through the open gates and into the nearby forest, beginning her search for the sins. As the holy knights near the edge of the kingdom were staring at the gate, their vision blocked by the bright light coming from behind them, they never saw another figure speedily leave the kingdom as well. Back in the middle of the kingdom, the open area that Ember used Flare at, Gilthunder now stood with his hundreds of holy knights, each one more confused than the other about the strange disappearance of Ember, who had just been in front of them. Though Gilthunder knew exactly what was going on, his hands clenched at his hips as he thought about Ember's words. You are the one betraying your father's ideals, Gilthunder. I'm only doing what His Majesty told me to do, and I am fulfilling that job to the fullest. Well played, Izuku. As the princess was moving through the forests outside of Lyonesse, Izuku found himself traveling through the very same forest. While he was far behind her, all he needed to do was follow the very tracks that she'd leave behind in order to catch up with the princess. Though it was hard to catch up with her, Izuku decided to help any civilians who were in his way towards finding the 7 deadly sins. The simple fact that he helped the people of Britannia was what caused the people to still have some sort of faith in the Holy Knights of Britannia. Over the course of the next few weeks, Izuku found himself living off the lay of the land, his mind never straying from the sole mission that King Bartra had given him after the Holy Knights began to attack the castle and his royal guard. That mission being to protect Princess Elizabeth from the Holy Knights and make sure she escapes the kingdom to complete another mission that she wanted to undergo herself, finding the 7 deadly sins. Izuku would cross multiple mountains and multiple hills just to complete his mission. Many towns would be saved along his path to protecting the people of Britannia rather than just causing chaos and pandemonium to the people of Britannia. As he passed through those towns, Izuku would stay for at least a night or two as he listened to stories about a large knight wearing purple-spiked armor passing through just days before he had. Following those rumors, Izuku soon stared at a large mountain with a strangely familiar-looking building sitting at the top of the hill. It's been a few weeks since leaving Lyonesse. I can only hope that I can catch back up with Lady Elizabeth, Izuku muttered as he continued through the forest. Along his path, he found himself staring at an old campsite. It was recently used. His eyes stared down at the old wood, charred and now seemingly transformed into coal as he crushed the pieces under his armored hand. His eyes glanced around the surrounding forest as he sat down and planted some more wood into the pit and started a new fire with his magic. Letting a groan of effort out, he took his armor off, revealing muscular arms that were filled with old scars from previous battles and training failures. Rubbing a hand over the arms, he stared down at them with nothing more than apathy. As of right now, I'm being looked at as a traitor of Lyonesse. I protected the princess because of her rank as the king's daughter. But why would the Holy Knights take over the kingdom? It doesn't make any sense. Izuku thought to himself, rubbing a scarred finger across his chin. For the evening, Izuku would eat some cooked venison. It was from a large deer he'd hunted earlier that day before setting up camp here, and he was glad that he wasn't losing any form of training. He had trained hard for the last decade in order to prevent himself from falling behind of the 7 deadly sins, whose main job was to protect both Britannia and Lyonesse from any and all threats. If he had to guess right now, if Meliodas had gone full power when he became the leader of the sins, he would only reach about barely 5.5% of the leader's full strength. And while Izuku was thinking about what his full power would be when he reached his prime, he felt a disturbance in the forest. Standing upright, he found himself staring at a rather large bear. It was massive, standing at around at least 10 meters in height. Preparing his blade, he stood upright in preparation for a fight. Only for 3 cubs to come out of the forest and moved near the fire he'd prepared. They all huddled near the fire, gathering warmth as the large bear glared down at him, as though he were encroaching on her territory. Placing his weapon away, Izuku created a large form of fire and placed it in the pit. Once the flames reached half the height of Izuku, the large bear revealed itself further to be the mother of the cubs, laying down near them in order to gather some warmth for herself. Letting out a sigh of relief, Izuku sat back down as he drank some water he'd gotten from the stream. His eyes never strayed from the bear cubs and mother as he thought about how they were huddling next to one another. As his eyes slowly closed, he never noticed how one of the cubs noticed him sleeping on his own and moving everyone near him. Next morning, outside the Boar Hat Tavern, inside a bar outside of a small town, a young man is seen gathering some food he'd cooked up. His cowlick strand of hair jiggled left and right as he gathered some booze and food into his arms before moving around the tavern itself and giving the people their orders. His golden yellow hair and teal-green eyes shined brightly as he animatedly talked to his customers as they spoke about different things they deal with all the time. And while he wasn't really looking the age of someone who should really be in charge of tavern, nobody ever really cared. The boy gave them booze and food, even if it was incredibly disgusting, and they thought nothing of it. On the wall of his tavern were multiple wanted posters holding pictures of 7 people who were being searched for by the Holy Knights. Though we see one who bears a resemblance to the owner of the tavern, though he seems to be an aged-up version of the boy. We then hear someone enter the tavern with a very concerned expression on their face as the young man rushes up and takes his order. "You won't believe what I just saw in the forest outside of town," a young man said, panting heavily. "What's up this time? Ever hear the story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf?" Another customer growled. "I saw a rusted set of armor walking around the edge of the village. I think it's one of the wanted sins," the young man said, as another spoke up. "It's been 10 whole years since they disappeared. You think one could still be around?" Another man questioned, not really believing his words. "I'm telling the truth." He was wearing large armor with spikes on it. Sure, the armor looked rusted and worse for wear, but I strongly believe that it's a sin, the young man said, looking concerned. "How can I take your order today, sir?" the young man asked his newest customer. "See, can I get a pint? I think I'm having a bad day as it is," the customer said, as the young man nodded. "All right, a pint of booze coming right up," the young man said, entering the kitchen. As the customers spoke to themselves about the boy's resemblance to the poster's picture, the young man found himself working hard and getting the pint fully prepared, and as he delivered the pint to his customer, he moved to back away from the table when the door opened up. Standing in the doorway was a rusted armor that looked 10 feet tall and had spikes on the shoulders, arms, and legs. The entire body of the armor trembled as it spoke up, and while everyone was frozen in place, they couldn't help but scream out in alarm. "Nanatsu no, Taizai, I'm looking." The armor spoke before the customers of the tavern screamed in fear and leaving. "It's the sins. Run for your lives." The customers all screamed in fear. "Call the Holy Knights," another of the customers called out. As they all left, the armor collapsed to the ground, the helmet falling off. The young man walked over towards where the armor lay on the ground, with a few tables knocked over from their stumbling. Looking down at the individual, he found that she had a very appealing face, but staring intently at her face, he couldn't help but feel something off about her. "Hawk, bring her to the bedroom upstairs," the young man said as Hawk huffed. "Wow, sending the pig to clean up your mess. Real kind of you, MSTR." Hawk huffed before helping the armored woman up the stairs. The young man stared at the picture of the wanted poster. Tearing the paper of a young man bearing a resemblance to him, all we see is the name remaining of the poster. Meliodas. Upstairs, the young man finds himself standing in front of the unconscious young woman. His eyes stare at her body all over, moving about the room as though he were trying to get a better angle at seeing who she was. His hands moved about her body, testing to see if she was malnourished or was just rather hungry before planting his palm over her BRSD and squeezing it softly. "Don't touch a girl right there. Are you crazy?" Hawk screeched to the young man. "I'm just testing out to see if she's okay. Nothing wrong with this." the young man cheekily said with a smile. In that moment, the young woman opened her eyes and sat upright. The young man, however, was still squeezing her chest as the young woman stared at him in confusion and worry before noticing where his hand was. Her face erupted in a blush as the young man gave one last squeeze before moving away with a nonchalant expression on his face before shouting out to Hawk. "She's okay," the young man said, giving an okay symbol. Hawk proceeded to completely wrap the young tavern owner in rope as they smacked his head repeatedly with their hooves. The young woman stared at the two with confusion. Though she wasn't complaining about the young man, GRPNG her without remorse. She only had one question on her mind as she stared at the two in confusion. "Do you have any food I can eat?" "Sure thing. Come downstairs and I can WHB you up something," the young man said before leaving. "Just be careful when eating his food. It's notoriously disgusting," Hawk said, as the young woman followed after the two of them. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew for a fact that these two were very close. And following the two down the stairs towards the main tavern area, she found herself sitting at the bar as the young man handed her some food. He gave her a smile as the young woman grabbed the fork and began to take her first bite, and as soon as she placed the food in her mouth, her entire body trembled. The young man leaned over the counter, giving her a very conspicuous smile on his face as he spoke to her in a very confident tone. "Disgusting, isn't it? Every man who's ate that has shat in their trousers," the young man called out happily. "It is, but still, it's delicious," the young woman said. Hawk questioned with confusion on their face. "So, what were you doing roaming around in that rusted old armor?" the young man questioned. "I'm on a personal quest to find the 7 deadly sins," the young woman said as Hawk spoke up. "Why would you do that? No one has any real idea if those guys are still alive or not. And they're serious villains." Hawk questioned as well. Before the young woman could speak up again, the door was knocked against as a new voice called out. "Open up. The villagers have told us who's in there. We are the Order of the Bearded Mountain Cats, serving under the Holy Knights from the foot of the mountain. Wandering Rust Knight, member of the 7 deadly sins, come out. And do so peacefully," a voice called out from the door. Boar Hat Tavern, seconds after the BMC arrived. "What's the matter with everyone today?" the young tavern owner questioned. "Holy Knights," the young woman said, looking concerned. "I don't think they're coming out," one of the knights said, whilst another spoke up. "That's kind of strange. When did someone put a tavern on top of this hill?" Now that you mention it, I don't even remember even seeing this 3 days ago. On your guard, because we're about to go up against a holy knight who answered directly to the king 10 years ago," the leader warned. "Come on, there's nothing to worry about, Eleone. I'm sure that he's old by now." "He's right. He's no match for fighters like us who are trained by Sir Twigo himself," another said in retort. "How many times have I told you, don't underestimate them?" When the uprising happened in Lyonesse, dozens of holy knights were butchered in an instant. Eleone called out in slight frustration. "Yeah, about that," the guy next to him muttered. "What is it?" Eleone questioned, narrowing his eyes at his friend. "Well, I gotta wonder if things were exaggerated a little bit." "And? What are you trying to say?" Eleone questioned, angered. "Well, everybody says that one holy knight is as powerful as 100 ordinary soldiers. So dozens of them murdered." His other friend said, not really buying the story. "I saw their bodies with my own eyes." Eleone growled angrily. "Everybody calm down. For now, just stand back, Eleone. I think we can handle one old man," the other knight said, before turning to the building and yelling. "Hey, get out here," he called out as the young man opened the door. "Yeah, what's up?" the young man questioned. The group of knights were caught off guard by how short the tavern owner was. They were expecting someone nearly as tall as they were, but not someone who looked to be the tavern owner's very own child. "Huh, who are you, little kid?" Eleone questioned, eyes wide. "Well, I'm the owner of this place," the young man retorted. "The wandering Rust Knights here sent him out," Eleone demanded as the young man let out a sigh before turning around. "Better come out," he called out as Hawk came into view. "Oh, HEW, who is calling for me?" "I'm Sir Hawk, the Rusty Knight," Hawk called out. "So, This pig is one of the 7 deadly sins? Aleone's friend questioned. Well, of course it's not. Aleone retorted. Hey, how little respect. I'm the captain of the Order of Scraps Disposal. Hawk indignantly called out. There is no such order. Aleone called out. If this pig's what you're after, you can grill him if you want. The young man said, pointing to Hawk. Give me a rest, will ya? Hawk called out. You little punk. You've got some nerve, making a mockery of a knights like this. Aleone growled, before the young woman peeked out. As soon as she thought she could make a run for it, she took off, catching Aleone's attention. His ally immediately called out to Aleone, who caused the young man to drop the tavern owner in confusion. Aleone, look. A girl just ran out from behind the tavern. We have to inform Sir Twiggo, the knight said, as Aleone grouched back at him. She must be the wandering Rust Knight. Get her, Aleone called out, as the group of knights ran after the young woman. Hold it right there, one of the soldiers called out, chasing after the young woman. Princess Elizabeth's point of view. There are many things that Elizabeth was not very happy about. Losing contact with her royal guard, not finding the sins, and for some reason liking being groped by that tavern owner. But at the top of that very simple list was the fact she was being chased by a few guards who worked for Sir Twiggo of the Holy Knights. Her hair fluttered in the wind as she did her best to stay as far ahead of the knights behind her as possible. But with how little she actually trained herself before going on a run outside the kingdom, she knew for a fact that she'd eventually be caught. Seize her, Aleone called out, as Elizabeth panted heavily. She leapt over tree roots, rolled down small hills, as Aleone was muttering to himself, talking about, if he captures her, how he could reach the level of Sir Twiggo and become a Holy Knight trainee. As he was muttering this, the sound of someone being hit from behind caught their attention, only for them all to see Hawk chasing after them, all with steam puffing out of their nose. The men called out about the pig attacking them as Hawk increased his speed to catch up with the knights, screeching about how they won't be getting away. As the pig continued through each of the knights behind Aleone, Hawk continued to chase after the young knight. Elizabeth was not too far ahead of Hawk as she paused before a large cliff looking over the horizon. As the young man was chasing after her, Elizabeth was taken out of sight. So when the young man looked over the cliff, he was extremely confused as to where she had gone, and when asking this, he was smacked in the back by Hawk launching him off the cliff. I'm not sure how I can thank you for saving me. Not just once but twice, Elizabeth said, before feeling the young tavern owner squeezing her chest again. I'm telling you, lady, feel free to jump off and punch him, Hawk called out. The trio could now be seen standing over the very same cliff, and Elizabeth was not very far away from the young tavern owner. So, can you tell me why you're even looking for the 7 deadly sins anyway? The tavern owner questioned. I want to ask them to help me stop the Holy Knights, Elizabeth said, her tone soft but filled with determination. Are you serious? Why in the world would you want to do that? The Holy Knights are the king's men. They're the knights who protect Leoness. Real heroes, Hawk asked, confused. But what if they were behind a plot to start a war in our country? Elizabeth asked, her face not looking towards the two. Oink, Hawk huffed. The other day, except for the king himself, the entire royal family were arrested and is being held by the Holy Knights, Elizabeth stated, her tone soft but sad. Does that mean he's sick in bed? Hawk asked, confused. That's just a cover story that the Holy Knights are using. I don't know what they think they can accomplish by driving the nation to war, but now they're drafting the people of the kingdom. They're taking men wherever they can get them. They're preparing for war everywhere you look. Soon, their reach will extend all the way out here, Elizabeth explained. That's not good, Hawk said, as the tavern owner agreed with his arms folded over his chest. You tough break, huh? The young man said, as Hawk looked to him. Wow, you don't really have any empathy at all, do you? Hawk asked dejectedly. So how does this tie in with the 7 deadly sins again? The young man asked, as Elizabeth explained further. If there's even the slightest hope of preventing the Holy Knights doing this, I know they're the only ones who can, Elizabeth said, with determination on her face. Just checking here, you try to find those guys, even though you know what kind of people they are? The young man questioned, trying to see if she was lying. The 7 deadly sins, the most vile order of knights the kingdom has ever produced, made up of 7 vicious BLD, thirsty criminals, each one marked with the brand of a beast. 10 years ago, when they were suspected of trying to overthrow the kingdom, the Knights of the Realm launched a full-force attack, scattering them to the 4 winds. Elizabeth said, as the tavern owner spoke up, "Well, if you believe the rumors, they each died a long time ago." The tavern owner retorted, "Such amazing people wouldn't possibly let themselves get killed." Elizabeth retorted, a little frustrated, but they are criminals, aren't they?" The tavern owner asked. "The Holy Knights are the ones causing the suffering of the people right now. Long ago, when I was small, only 5 or 6 years old, my father would tell me stories about them. And that's when I learned they were the most powerful knights dash." Elizabeth yelled before talking calmly before being interrupted by a strange, slashing sound. Crumble. Crash. Elizabeth screamed in confusion. Behind them all was a large man wearing large maroon, red armor, holding a blade out to his right. A large portion of the ground surrounding the trio was sliced off the cliff as they all began to fall towards the bottom of the cliff. Elizabeth screamed as she fell. Give me a break," Hawk screeched as Meliodas just sat in the air falling. "Oopsie, I forgot to name whether they were the people named in the report." Conclusion: 2 individuals of unknown origin dead. "What do you think, men? Does that sound about right?" The tall man questioned, staring over his shoulder at his men. "But sir, Alione is still under the cliff," the knight said, concerned. "Well, then simply put 3 fatalities in the report," the man said, as the guards stared at him in differing signs of disturbed expressions. "But you can't, Sir Twigo, that's too far. Even for you," the young knight said, as Twigo narrowed his eyes at the men. "How about 7 fatalities instead?" he threatened as the men stood upright. "And no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to kill us," the man said, before the tavern owner launched out of the cliff with Elizabeth and Alione. "Look, it's Alione," the guard called out as Twigo stared at the trio. "You there, how dare you survive without say so? I shall not be revising my death tally conclusion," Twigo called out, as Hawk yelled back in kind. "Who asked you to anyway?" Hawk screeched. With the tavern owner and Elizabeth, the young woman is seen holding her eyes closed as the young man holds her in his arms. "Hey, are you awake?" he asked, completely serious. Oh, yes," Elizabeth replied with slight confusion. "Okay, when I signal to you, you run into the forest." "Got it," the tavern owner asked, as Elizabeth stared at him in confusion. "All right, got it," Elizabeth said, as he put her down. Twigo began to move towards the group as he pulled out his blade in preparation for a fight. He watched the trio as he glanced between each of them whilst talking to his guardsmen. "Tell me, who would you believe is a part of the 7 deadly sins? Does any of them resemble anything from the wanted posters?" Twigo questioned, before his eyes laid themselves on Elizabeth's earring. Fate is smiling upon me today. The crystal you're wearing on that earring is from the royal family." "Which?" Conclusion: "Our Princess Elizabeth," Twigo announced, walking towards the group. "Hold on, you're a princess?" he asked, confused. "Wait, are you really Princess Elizabeth? You're the 3rd princess in the royal family," Hawk asked, concerned. "A decree has been issued by the capital to determine your whereabouts. The order was to capture you alive and in healthy condition. But if you lost your life in an unfortunate accident," Twigo declared as the tavern owner called out to Elizabeth. "Go now," he called out, allowing Elizabeth to run away. "I must not let myself be captured. I can't afford to give up yet," Elizabeth yelled as she ran. Conclusion: accidental death, Twigo called out, swinging his blade in a horizontal strike. The strike alone was enough to get rid of all the trees that made up a major portion of the forest on the hill. A massive explosion that rang throughout the entire valley, and in a small campsite at the bottom of the hill, stirring a knight wearing black and green armor that covered their face. A small flicker of flame, leaving the hair of the individual. The tavern owner is seen over Elizabeth having protected her from the attack from Twigo. And as he asked if she was okay, before asking if Hawk was alright, the group stand back up as they stand before Twigo again. Though, Hawk runs away because he was hit by a stick that caused small spurts of BLD to come out from the top of their body, greatly confusing Twigo as he continued to walk towards the princess and the tavern owner. "Pig, no matter," Twigo said before glaring at the two. Elizabeth stands up as she prepared to give herself up to the Holy Knights. Her mind settled on not allowing the young man who defended her time and again to be killed for her inability to protect them in kind. "Elizabeth? Hey, what are you doing?" the tavern owner asked, confused. "There's no escape," Elizabeth muttered. "Hey, hang on, you just said that you couldn't allow them to capture you, or to give up," the tavern owner said, hands in his pockets. "Maybe if I give myself up to him, he'll agree to take me back and you can be spared," Elizabeth said as Twigo lifted his blade. A large slash came from the ground heading to the princess as the tavern owner grabbed her, whilst losing the left sleeve of his shirt. "Please, try to get away while you still can," Elizabeth cried out, not wanting to really die, but wanting to let the tavern owner escape. "Think he wants to make sure neither one of us wants to get out of here alive," the tavern owner said, a strange red mark appearing near his left shoulder. "Why? I love the time I spent with you in the tavern. I spent so much time searching for the 7 deadly sins on my own. My own royal guard gave up his life in order to allow me this one mission, but I feel so scared, walking around in that rusty armor, hoping that nobody would recognize me," Elizabeth cried as Twigo moved on the duo. As Elizabeth continued to talk to the young tavern owner about why she didn't want to involve him with her problems, a small flash appeared in the owner's mind, a brief moment where a woman who bore a resemblance to Elizabeth, though she had pink hair rather than white, BLD falling from her mouth before disappearing all that much faster as Elizabeth mentioned she didn't even know his name. That was when he introduced himself to her with a smile on his face. "Meliodas, if you really want to know," the tavern owner said with a smile on his face. Elizabeth's eyes widened in confusion before they centered on the small mark on the young man's shoulder. But she also remembered the wanted poster on the wall in his tavern, and she was rightfully skeptical about him as Meliodas smirked at her with closed eyes. "How can you? You're just," Elizabeth asked, as the knights were holding Alione. "Where'd he go?" Alione called out, fear-stricken. "Alione, that boy with the sword. Where is he?" Alione asked again. "Just take it easy, all right. Sir Twigo is handling it." "You idiots. Don't you dare get him angry. If you do, the whole kingdom will fall," Alione called out. When he saved me from the cliff, that's when I saw it. He's the real thing. The most dangerous one of them all. The symbol is right there on his shoulder." "It's right there," Alione said, as Elizabeth finally noticed the symbol. "That symbol on your arm there, it's some kind of beast?" "Wait, that's a dragon," Elizabeth called out, as Twigo appeared above Meliodas. He raised his blade above the two before swinging it down, creating a massive slicing motion in the ground with magic. But moments before his attack could continue, a strange sensation appeared on his cheek before it sliced through. An impact frame of his expression bordering on confusion appeared as Meliodas stood in front of him. He stumbled back with confusion on his face as he wondered what the hell happened. "How is this possible? My technique was flawless. I'm certain my blade struck him. But the one who felt the pulse of the blow, how could it possibly have been me? And what is that in your hand? A broken blade?" Twigo called out. "Meliodas, is that actually who you are? Really?" Elizabeth asked, as Twigo's eyes enlarged in growing fear. "Wait a minute. Now your face is beginning to look familiar. But if that is who you truly are, then how have you not aged a single day?" Twigo questioned before glaring down at Meliodas. "Time's up. Have you figured it out yet?" Meliodas asked, with a smirk on his face. "And yet you still dare to exist," Twigo screamed, slamming his blade down towards Meliodas. But before either could even land a blow on the other, a pillar of living fire slammed into the ground. Between the two, Meliodas and Elizabeth were launched back from the force of the pillar of flames, slamming right in front of them, whilst Twigo was stumbled back again. This caused his attack to slice through the ground to his left, nearly taking down his and his men's horses. A sword was then flicked out, as Twigo could only gape in horror as another Holy Knight appeared before him. Though this time it wasn't on his side. The sword was something that Elizabeth immediately recognized as her eyes grew wider than before. Meliodas was actually greatly confused with this appearance, as the figure spoke out using the very same move, though named differently from his own. Something he remembers teaching another Holy Knight because they wanted to learn under him as a skill they could use against others if he were to ever be attacked. Solar. Counter. The knight called out, as Twigo called out in response. This power, it should only belong to someone else, to that of a legend. How are you capable of wielding such legendary power? Twigo called out as a massive blast of solar energy blasted into his body, creating a massive explosion on the hilltop. Meliodas decided to speak up to Elizabeth as Twigo was sent flying away, though his guards were running after him as well. Meliodas gave his full name and occupation. One of the 7 deadly sins, the sin of wrath, dragon's sin, Meliodas. Nobody can touch the princess without King Bartra's direct order. The knight said before taking a knee. Meliodas and Elizabeth immediately get up as they rush over to the knight. Elizabeth is looking tearfully at the knight as they take off the strange helmet he was wearing over his face to reveal Izuku hidden underneath it as he smiled at the two of them. Meliodas, however, is watching Izuku with concern and wariness as he watches the Holy Knight get hugged by Elizabeth, not really trusting him in the moment. Meliodas asks Izuku a question. Are you on Elizabeth's side or the Holy Knight's? Meliodas questioned. King Bartra gave me direct orders to protect the princess. I no longer work for the Holy Knights, Sir Meliodas. Izuku retorted with a smirk of his own. Are you working for the Holy Knights like Elizabeth warned me about? Meliodas questioned, pointing his half-blade at Izuku. The young knight stared at Meliodas with nothing more than confusion on his expression, all before realizing that Princess Elizabeth had informed Meliodas why they were even searching for the 7 deadly sins in the first place. Keeping his knelt position on the ground, Izuku held out his blade to Meliodas, placing himself in a very vulnerable position, as well as showing a sign for the captain of the sins that he wasn't a threat. He then spoke up in a tone that belied a lot of hidden information from the captain of the sins. Captain Meliodas of the 7 deadly sins. I am here on orders from King Bartra III to help Princess Elizabeth Leoness find the 7 deadly sins. I am to act as her royal guard from this point onward. Nothing more, nothing less. Izuku informed as Meliodas gave a happy smirk. Reaching a hand out to Izuku, the captain helped Izuku up to his feet before noticing something about him. From how Meliodas stood across from Izuku, it seems as though the boy he had once seen to be nearly the same height as him was now taller. It was very cool to see that the young boy who he helped Zaratros with Izuku's training in order to become a holy knight of his own. Not only that, but he could see the armor the young man was wearing at the moment and couldn't help but feel pride in the fact that the young man had actually stuck with the dark emerald green armor for his, well, armor. I see you're sticking to your normal set of colored clothing, Meliodas said, chuckling. It's been a long time, Sir Meliodas, Izuku said, looking at the diminutive leader of the sins. Wait, you both know one another? How? Elizabeth asked, confusion on her expression. I met Izuku here when he was undergoing his training with Gilthunder about a decade ago. At the time, Izuku was far less a holy knight and more of a boy who was undergoing the apprenticeship program that the holy knights have. Meliodas said, with a cheeky smile. Really? I didn't know that you were much older than myself. Elizabeth said, looking to Izuku. I'm only 25. Izuku yelled as Hawk walked up. Anyway, we should probably head over to the next village. If you're really the captain of the 7 deadly sins, that means you're looking for the sins, right? Hawk asked curiously. Yeah, I was already looking for them. Why do you think I was even in this zone anyway? Meliodas questioned, looking to Hawk. It's not my fault. I had no clue you were one of the sins. Hawk screeched. About an hour later, the trio and Hawk arrived at the Boar Hat Tavern. Izuku stared up at the building with curiosity as he glanced over at Elizabeth, as she was looking at the slightly damaged building with growing levels of concern. Izuku then glanced over at Meliodas as he grabbed a few of the fallen trees and used magic to transform them into the wooden planks needed to fix the building. Climbing up the stairs, the trio entered the building as they moved towards the main bar area, with Izuku sitting at the front desk area with Elizabeth sitting to his right. So what's the next step in our location? Izuku asked, as Meliodas smirked at him with a very concerning smile. We're going to the town of Dalmari. Meliodas called out. So, we're going to be looking for the sins there? How are we going to find them? Elizabeth asked, concern in her expression. How I've been doing it, by setting up the bar just outside the town and getting their attention through papers. Meliodas called out happily. All right, so how are we going to get there? Last I checked, you couldn't get the Boar Hat Tavern out of the ground. Izuku questioned as Meliodas grinned salaciously. Mama Hawk, Meliodas called out. Equals on the ground, outside the Boar Hat Tavern equals. Twiggo stay on the ground where he lay. Burns were covering his armor from the neck down. His face was horrifically burned from the left side of his face down to his chin, his appealing mustache having been burned away and cauterized. His body twitched where he lay as the ground rumbled, and as he stared up at the sky, he found a large green-skinned pig walking over to him with nothing more than a happy smile on its face. Beep, beep, equals end of scene equals. Vanya, 5 hours later. When Mama Hawk arrived outside of Dalmari, Izuku was fully prepared to feel the building tremble to a stop. But all he felt was a strange feeling of vertigo, as gravity seemed to pause for a moment before it returned to him, causing him to stumble. Glancing over at Meliodas, the young-looking captain stared at the wanted posters on the wall, watching them with what appeared to be precision as he glanced between each one. Elizabeth came down the stairs wearing the uniform that Meliodas had informed her to wear when working inside the tavern. All right, for now, we're going to be gathering information on any news about a sin being in Dalmari. The Forest of White Dreams is on the outskirts of the town, and while I would love to search it right now, we can't. Not until we know for sure that one of the sins are in there. Meliodas said, glancing between Izuku and Elizabeth. Mr. Meliodas, as much as I am willing to follow through with this plan, why do you have Princess Elizabeth standing in a very lecherous uniform? Izuku asked, as Hawk interjected. Because this idiot doesn't have any other uniforms that she can wear. The filthy pervert. Hawk screeched. I can always have Izuku turn you into roasted pork. Meliodas warned, with a joking face. Eat, Hawk screamed before running away. Again, Meliodas, why do you have her wearing that uniform anyway? Wouldn't that make her vulnerable? Izuku asked, concerned. It's just to throw off anyone who comes nearby. They see her earring and will probably think of the princess. But at the same time, why would a princess of Lyonesse be working in a tavern? It's genius, Meliodas said, raising a finger in the air. Okay, but it's not because it's going to give you a free chance to grope the princess, is it? Izuku questioned with a glare. Now, why would I ever do that? Meliodas asked, with a bright smile on his face. I'm going to pass the flyers in Dalmari. Just keep yourself out of harm's way, Captain. Izuku stated, sighing as he left the building. With that said, Izuku walked out of the tavern and onto the front porch. Staring at the small town in the distance, he took a deep breath before looking to his left. There he found the Forest of White Dreams, just sitting right there for him to explore. He watched as the mist over the forest never left its station, almost as though certain forms of magic was preventing it from leaving the place. Without much else to think about, he walked towards the town where he started placing up flyers on nearby buildings. As he was doing this, Meliodas and Elizabeth were setting up the tavern for their customers to be coming. In the time that they were preparing, Princess Elizabeth was preparing whilst trying her best to not be fondled by the captain of the sins. Izuku was placing flyers on multiple buildings that were in the direct vicinity of the town and the main plaza of the town itself. Upon arrival, however, He found himself staring over at the middle of the village as he stood near a group of civilians watching a group of men try and pull a large sword from the ground. Excalibur, Izuku thought to himself before recognizing the blade. Wait, that's not Excalibur. Izuku moved closer to the group before noticing two regular knights of Lyonesse. He watched as they drank and ate to their heart's content, laughing hysterically about how the people were such weaklings that they couldn't pull out a single blade. Izuku watched them go on from where he stood without a single ounce of sympathy for the two knights who were laughing their butts off. Though he did notice that a few of the people looked very similar to the sins that he'd met in the past. While he'd never met them face to face, he could recognize their magical signatures. None of the people here had such magical signatures, but there were a few that were similar. But it was dormant, meaning that they were untrained in how to be able to use magic and become holy knights. That was when one of the villagers spoke up to him. They were an elderly woman who stared at the group of men with nothing more than both trepidation as well as concern. Her tone was filled with sadness as she glanced at Izuku, who was still placing a poster on the wall. They've been at this for weeks, and they haven't been able to get that sword out of the well, the elderly woman said, garnering Izuku's attention. How so? Izuku asked, as the elderly woman glanced at him. One day, about a few days ago, a holy knight came here. He came to check out if our ale was the best in Lyonesse, and he stated that it was horrible. One of our own got angry at him and tossed a bug into his cup, only for him to stab his blade into the ground, stopping our precious water from being released. The elderly woman said, as Izuku blinked, "You all haven't been able to sell any ale in the last 2 weeks?" Izuku asked, as the woman nodded. "It's been HRD on all of us, but we can't sell anything if that blade is still in the ground," the elderly woman said, as a small boy rushed up to the blade. Izuku watched with intrigue on his expression as the boy attempted to pull the blade from the stone. He did nothing as he walked away, his mind racing on how he could help the citizens of Dalmari without letting them know that he was a holy knight. Otherwise, they might think that he was the knight who placed the sword there in the first place. So as he was walking away, he watched the people of Dalmari look over at the posters on the walls. Walking back to the tavern was not without its seductions. Izuku walked by a path that led into the forest of white dreams, his eyes watching the forest closely. His left foot raised ahead in the direction of the forest before he shook his head in dismay at his action before continuing down the path towards the tavern. He had to inform Meliodas about what was going on in the town of Dalmari, just to see if he should interfere with the town and help them. His heart wanted to help those innocent civilians, but the logical part of his mind told him that he needed to make sure that he chose the perfect time to do that. Boar Hat Tavern, late afternoon. Upon arriving inside the Boar Hat Tavern, Izuku found himself staring at quite the sight. Princess Elizabeth was practically crimson with how much she was blushing as Meliodas continued to fondle her rear, and it was something that Izuku himself had to pause to stare at. While normally he'd be against anyone touching the princess in such a fashion, just the look of sheer, confused pleasure on her face stopped him. Izuku had been moments away from telling the captain of the Sins to let go of the princess, but with a sigh that announced his presence that caught their attention, Izuku sat down at the front table. Meliodas stopped what he was doing, though his hands continued to grope Elizabeth. His eyes watched as Izuku sat down in the chair in front of the door before he stopped entirely GRPNG Elizabeth and moved over to him. By the time he sat down, Izuku glanced up and began to speak. "Captain, we've got a problem in Dalmari," Izuku said, as Meliodas gained a serious expression. "Holy Knights, huh?" Meliodas replied, in a questioning manner. "Yeah, but I know whose sword is in the well. I've known him since I began my training under Sir Zaratros. Still can't believe that it's been 10 years since his death," Izuku said, moving a hand through his hair. "Whose sword is it?" Meliodas asked, concerned. "It's Gilthunder's own blade. Somehow he managed to reach Dalmari before we did. And the last time I saw him was 2 weeks ago, back when I fought him and the other holy knights in Lyonesse," Izuku explained as he rubbed his chin. "Then why didn't you pull the blade out?" Meliodas asked, confused. "I would have, but what about the townspeople of Dalmari? They'll think that I'm a holy knight," Izuku said, as Meliodas nodded. While that is true, you taking the blade out would be better for them. It would free them from whatever is stopping their well from working. Meliodas said as Izuku nodded. All right, I'll head back there right now to take care of it, Izuku said, standing up from the table. Don't take too long, Izuku. I need you to help in making food for everyone. Everybody in Britannia knows I can't cook. Meliodas called out as Izuku left the building. As Izuku left through the front door, Meliodas and Elizabeth got right to work. Customers immediately showed up around a minute after Izuku had left the tavern, all sitting down in seats to get their ale and drink themselves unconscious. And one such customer was a young boy, who looked a bit rugged for his young appearance, while he was looking at Meliodas and Elizabeth as though they were too young to own such a place. The trio slide a conversation with one another. Vanya, late afternoon, 5 hours before dusk. Izuku walked through the empty streets of Dalmari, his mind a whirlwind of chaos. He watched the nearby buildings, feeling as though someone was watching him from the distance as he moved about the village so late in the day. Most of the people in Dalmari had moved towards the tavern on the hill, making sure that nobody of note was nearby the well where he was closing in on. His hand moved in front of him, revealing some scars from his training under Zaratros when he learned how to wield a blade. Taking a deep breath, Izuku moved towards the well, standing before the very weapon that Gilthunder used to basically screw the town over. He stood there watching the blade, as though it had a mind of its own, a soul of its own in his eyes. Kneeling before the blade itself, Izuku let a small bit of his magic softly flow from his body, creating a small aura of green flames surrounding his body. The energy floated towards the blade as though it were interacting with the blade itself, and with nothing more than magic, Izuku watched the memory of it. Hours leading to Gilthunder slamming the blade into the ground played in Izuku's mind. He watched as Gilthunder treated the people of Dalmari as nothing more than peasants compared to those within Lyonesse. How he treated them as nothing more than meat shields when fighting a particularly powerful opponent, but there was only one name on the young knight's mind the whole time. Margaret Lyonesse. I see. So you haven't turned against me, and you haven't turned against the sins, Izuku thought as he stood up. Izuku's hand moved towards the blade, and as his hand wrapped around the handle of the blade, he heard laughter. Turning his eyes to look at the ones who were laughing at him, he found the very same knights who had been laughing at the inhabitants of Dalmari. They were drinking some ale again. Only this time, it seemed as though they were laughing at his measly attempt at taking the blade from the well. What are they even doing here? I could have sworn that it's too late for their shift in guarding the well, Izuku thought as he turned his attention to them. Hey, if you're going to try and lift that blade, go from the left. One of the knights yelled out, laughing at their joke. And when you fail, try and not cry about it. That's what happens when you attack a holy knight. The other knight yelled out in laughter. Izuku let a small bit of his aura flare out for a moment, catching the two off guard. While he wasn't one to kill others, having them see his aura was basically telling them to inform their boss that Izuku was in Dalmari. He walked over to the two knights, their bodies trembling as they stuttered out his name. Holy Knight Izuku. I thought he was dead. The knights stuttered out in fear. My death was greatly exaggerated, Izuku replied, using his magic to delete the memory of him using magic from their minds. As they stared at him in shock, Izuku then used his physical strength to knock each of them out. As their bodies hit the ground, Izuku took their ale and food before tossing it in the trash. It didn't need to be in the hands of such weak individuals. Izuku moved back towards the well, his mind fully locked on freeing the well from the might of Gilthunder's weapon. His hand found itself perched on the handle of the blade, and he slowly lifted the blade from the stone well. Piece by piece the sword left the well, the sheen of the blade shining in the late afternoon light. By the time he had fully pulled the blade from the well, Izuku stared down at the jagged blade. It was set up to look similarly to that of a lightning bolt, and it was rather appealing in the late afternoon's fading light of the sun. Lifting the blade, Izuku stared off into the distance as he felt Gilthunder's magical energy in the air, staring in the direction of where Gilthunder was as he sheathed the weapon at his hip. Walking back towards the Boar Hat Tavern, he felt for Gilthunder's action to retaliate against Dalmari managing to pull his blade from the well. Fort Salgars, 12.5 kilometers away from Vanya village. Gilthunder could be seen looking over some papers, and as he was doing this, a strange sensation entered his chest. It was a feeling that his weapon was pulled from Vanya's well, something that allowed them to make great ale. His eyes blinked in confusion before he stood up from the throne he sat upon. The fort he was staying within served as a crossing point between villages who wished to commit trade. Walking through the hall, he glanced at one of the nearby soldiers. "Soldier, from which direction is Vanya village?" Gilthunder asked, his tone cool and soft. "Huh? Oh, Vanya is to the south. But why do you need to know that?" The soldier asked, confused. "Thank you. What is the estimated distance from Fort Salgars?" Gilthunder thanked before asking further. "I'd say it's about 12 to 13 kilometers from here." "What?" the soldier questioned, further confused. The soldier would then watch as Gilthunder lifted a nearby spear. He watched as Gilthunder infused the spear with his lightning magic as he pulled his right arm back. The weapon's lightning continues to flash around it sporadically. And with a singular grunt of effort, the spear leaves his hand, becoming nothing more than a bright blue streak of energy flying in the direction of Vanya village. While Izuku and Meliodas were doing their own things within Vanya village, off to the north we see a bright light coming. Lightning courses all around whatever that bright light is, as both Izuku and Meliodas both head towards where they noticed a strange feeling of magic in the area. With the spear that Gilthunder had thrown, it zooms through the sky at impressive speeds, heading towards the center of Vanya village. It isn't until Izuku arrives near the center of the village that he sees the bright light incoming, and he prepares to catch the weapon. But at the same time, he notices how it's not close enough for him to catch from where he stood. So, running as fast as he can, he moves towards the direction of the Boar Hat Tavern, only to find both Meliodas and Elizabeth standing outside looking at the stars. Meliodas is looking around the area as well, completely ignoring Princess Elizabeth talking to him at the moment of the sins and where they might find one of them. Meliodas is humming to himself, agreeing with Elizabeth on some parts before a flash of light hits the captain's eyes. Staring up at the sky, a flash in a second where you could miss it. The spear flies straight towards him, and Elizabeth, holding his hand out, the captain manages to catch the weapon. Though it's not without its own difficulty, as he is dragged with the weapon, sliding through the ground, creating a massive divot. He bounces from the hills nearby, making his way towards the Vanya village town center. Izuku is already there when Meliodas slides to a stop in front of the young man, as lightning sparks all around Meliodas' arm and the spear he holds. Izuku watched as Meliodas inspected the weapon, looking in the direction of where it came from before spinning a single rotation, and throwing the weapon with his left arm, with the spear blasting off in the same direction it had originated from. The same flash of white light covered the weapon as it flew back into the distance from where it once came. "Captain, are you sure that was a good idea?" Izuku asked, as Meliodas smirked. "Not really, but we can't just let the people of Vanya village lose their ability to make booze," Meliodas said, a smile on his face. "So, where do we go next?" Izuku questioned, looking in the direction the spear had flown. "We'll be going to the Forest of White Dreams. That's where we will find the next sin," Meliodas said, as he walked back towards the Boar Hat Tavern. Izuku followed close behind, wanting nothing more than to make sure that nothing else came. And as the night continued onward, the trio would go to bed within the Boar Hat Tavern, Izuku sleeping in the main area of the tavern, having drunken himself to sleep, muttering small things about being the hero that this world needs, even if he's not really an inhabitant of the world and its magical beings. Fort Sojourn, late evening, after Meliodas had thrown the spear back. Gilthunder could be seen sitting on his throne, staring at some parchment. His eyes looked over the new laws that his commanders were giving to the kingdom of Lyonesse and its surrounding territories. He was so enthralled with the small laws coming to these backwater villages that he nearly missed the energy coming towards him from the distance. And off towards the south, a bright light came towards him. And with a massive explosion, the spear landed right in the throne room, where Gilthunder had sat on his throne with his head tilted to the left to dodge the weapon thrown back at him. His eyes were quiet, but the small upturn of his lips showed that he was very happy. Though what nobody was sure, that was until he spoke. All around him, his subordinates were staring at him in varying levels of alarm. A small cut appearing on his right cheek as he placed a metal-plated hand under his left cheek, the smile on his face growing. So you really are alive. Meliodas of the 7 deadly sins. Gilthunder wondered aloud. Sir Gilthunder! The guards all screamed out in fear. Prepare the wagons. We leave for Vanya village at once. Gilthunder said, moving towards the stables. What? What? His men questioned, confusion in their tone. Because we're going to hunt one of the 7 deadly sins. Gilthunder replied, his face neutral. Forest of White Dreams. Next morning. In the misty forest of white dreams, for figures could be seen walking amongst the dead trees. Izuku was leading the pathway with a singular flared-up ball of fire floating in the air with the captain, Elizabeth and Hawk trailing behind him. The trio behind Izuku didn't say a single word as they walked through the forest, though Meliodas wouldn't stop trying to grope Elizabeth throughout the entire journey, greatly causing the princess distress. While Izuku wasn't one to accept such a thing, the princess still hadn't asked the captain to stop with his incessant perverted antics. So Izuku was forced to just let it continue until they reached an impasse within the forest. A fork in the pathway leading deeper into the forest, and as Izuku stared between the forked road, Meliodas spoke up. How about we split up? You go to the left, and I go to the right. Meliodas asked, looking to Izuku. Are you sure that's a good idea, Captain? Izuku questioned, looking at the short man. Yeah, I'm sure I can handle protecting Elizabeth for a while, Meliodas said, waving off his concern. Izuku watched the captain for a little while, and most of his thoughts moved to the princess. He was tasked with protecting her until the very end by King Bartra. So leaving her in the capable hands of Meliodas sounded pretty fine on paper. There just was one small problem. The captain just couldn't stop laying his grubby fingers on the princess's rear end and melons all at once. If I separate from you both, you had better stop messing with the princess. Izuku growled, as Meliodas smirked and nodded. I will stop messing with her, Meliodas said, as Izuku turned down the opposing path. When he disappeared, the two walked down the other path with Hawk trailing behind them. And while they were all going generally in the same direction, something odd happened for both parties. Meliodas and Elizabeth weren't attacked by the forest itself, seeing as how Meliodas instantly noticed the imps moving through the tree-line that was covered by the mists. It was Izuku who would be attacked by the imps through visions of a life he used to have. The young man walked through the forest with nothing more than an impassive expression hidden inside the helmet he wore. But all around him, his vision switched to that of the home he all but missed at this point. Mizudafu's streets appeared before him, giving him pause to take in his surroundings. Izuku couldn't help but notice how everything looked exactly the same as it was before he came to Britannia. Even Might Tower could be seen in the distance. Izuku continued to walk through the streets of Mizudafu, his gaze taking in everything. Staring around the place, he could hear the sounds of people laughing and the sound of children having fun. But it wasn't until he paused in the middle of the forest that he felt a strange presence. And while he knew he wasn't back in Mizudafu, he couldn't ignore the presence that he used to connect to his idol at the time. A shuddering breath left his mouth as he turned around to see All Might standing before him. The man's face looking exactly the same way it had when Izuku had last seen the man. His entire form blocked out the sun, and Izuku couldn't help but feel like a kid again. While the man didn't speak, his memories of what the man had always told everyone sprouted from the deepest recesses of his mind, about how anyone and everyone could become a hero, so long as you put in the work to become a hero. But at the end of the day, shaking his head, he is seeing himself on top of a building. The very same one where he jumped off of in his world, the very same one where All Might had crushed his dreams and left him there with the demons of his soul. Can I become a hero? A hero like you, without a power of my own, without a quirk? Could I ever become a hero like you? Izuku's former self called out to his hero. Can one become a hero without a quirk? No, I should think not. All Might's voice reverberated inside his head. As Izuku stared at the hero, his form now taking on what his younger self had. Tears flitted down from his eyes from within the helmet he wore, having stopped moving through the forest as the imps bounced around him as though they were conducting a ritual. But as they were dancing around him, they weren't noticing the small wisps of fire that were beginning to coalesce into a burning rage of being forced to see these memories once again. His hands were clenching so hard that if it weren't for the metal greaves that were over them, his hands would be bleeding from the tightness of how hard he clenched them. It wasn't until an explosion of fire burst from around him that Izuku returned from the strange visions. Izuku panted heavily from having to look through his past once again, glaring at the imps who were launched back from the attack Izuku used. He hated using such a move since it was bound to hurt someone who had gotten too close to him, and staring at the imps, he found that they weren't injured. Well, he wouldn't say injured to the point that they couldn't move. They were just shivering when staring at him before bouncing away in fear. Taking a deep breath through his nose, Izuku found himself taking a knee. I'm not in that world. They cannot hurt me. I can be a hero, no matter what he said. Izuku thought to himself before pushing onward. Forest of White Dreams. Later morning/early afternoon. Finding the Serpent Sin. It didn't take much longer for Meliodas, Elizabeth, and Hawk to find what they were looking for, considering the fact that after they dealt with their own problems with the imps, that Meliodas swiftly handled after figuring out which of them was the real Elizabeth. By having the Elizabeth clones jump in the air, so he could see her chest bounce, all before Elizabeth saying she couldn't with a massive blush on her face, allowing Meliodas to defeat all the imps and send them running. With them defeated, the trio eventually came across a sleeping giant in both the literal and figurative meanings of the word for giant. Even with the woman sleeping on the ground, having herself curled up, the mist that was slowly letting up revealed her true form. Long dark brown hair cascaded from her scalp all the way towards her lower back, a rather large bust, and an adorable face whose eyes were slowly opening. The giant seemingly noticed that the imps had decided to leave her alone in the forest against the figures who were coming towards her. It took a misunderstanding between herself and the trio for the giant to realize something about Meliodas. He didn't even change his appearance from the last 10 years since she'd last seen him, and within seconds she could be seen nuzzling her face against his. Though, if anything, the size difference between the two were so apparent that Meliodas just let it happen since the giantess was apparently in love with him. Though at the same time, she wondered why Meliodas was even there considering the last time they met. They were running from the kingdom of Lyonesse. It took no longer than a few minutes to catch the giantess up on what had happened. Though Meliodas and Elizabeth forgot to mention that one of the Holy Knights was on their side, they were interrupted by the arrival of lightning slamming into the ground. The two Sins and Elizabeth turned to see who had just arrived, only to find Gilthunder standing before them with lightning sparking across his armor. His periwinkle pink eyes stared between the two Sins and Elizabeth, before pointedly ignoring her presence in the area and pointing his jagged blade towards Meliodas. So we finally meet. Sir Meliodas. Gilthunder's voice softly growled out. Who the heck are you? The giantess questioned. My name is Gilthunder, the lightning magic-wielding Holy Knight, and I have come here to destroy you both. Gilthunder said, as Meliodas stepped up. Don't worry, guys, I've got this. Meliodas said, as both he and Gilthunder stared at one another. For a good long moment, neither side made a move. A small breeze passing by and causing the two's hair to flutter slightly, before all hell broke loose with Gilthunder blitzing over to Meliodas' personal space. Appearing behind the small captain, he swung his blade towards the unguarded captain's back, launching him through the forest and causing any nearby imps to flee the area. The captain then leapt back onto his feet as Gilthunder blitzed into his view again, swinging his blade over and over against the captain's body, the slashes creating small gashes against the clothes he wore. Sparks of lightning went onto Elizabeth, Hawk, and the giantess, causing them minor paralysis. And as the two continued their fight, Meliodas eventually landed a multi-hit combo on Gilthunder, slamming him into the dirt and forcing him to back off. Neither said a word before Gilthunder raised his blade and pointed it at both Meliodas and the giantess as she stayed kneeled on her knees. I've always dreamed of this moment, for I am stronger than all of the 7 deadly sins, Gilthunder said, swinging his blade towards Meliodas. A large gash was created through his clothes, BLD actually spraying from the wound. Elizabeth was so in shock in this moment that she completely forgot that she probably shouldn't have called upon her knight's name. But this was an actual emergency. Ember, save US. Elizabeth called out, garnering both Gilthunder's and the giantess's attention. Ember, who's that? The giantess questioned. Ember is here? Gilthunder asked, confused. Before anything else could be stated, however, a pillar of fire appeared in the middle of the field. An armored individual with green flames marring the coating of his armor. Before where the helmet was supposed to be revealed a set of black hair with green highlighted in the sun. The young man pulled out his claymore and held it out towards Gilthunder as Izuku spoke towards Gilthunder in a small tone. You say you're stronger than the 7 deadly sins, but you haven't killed them yet, Izuku said before a green flame surrounded his blade. I will not miss this time, Gilthunder said, entering his stance. Within the moments that Izuku arrived, both knights of Lyonesse attacked the other. Claymore hitting scabbard, lightning clashing with fire, shockwaves blasting in all directions as trees were uprooted. Meliodas and the giantess watched in curiosity as both knights countered their every attack the other threw at one another, green flames licking at the blue. Lightning that sparked from the scabbard. Eventually, Izuku managed to get the upper hand through swiping Gilthunder's legs out from under him and grabbing the knight by the face, and using a burst of flame magic to drag the knight through the dirt and rock. A large divot was created in the forest of white dreams before Izuku kicked Gilthunder into the air, pointing his blade at where Gilthunder was going to be falling towards, before launching a beam of fire towards the young knight. As the flames hit his form, a massive explosion of magical fire burst in the area, causing one of the trees nearby to catch fire before Izuku sucked in a breath, forcing the fire to leave the tree and enter through his mouth. Once that was finished, Izuku watched as Gilthunder ran through the smoke created from the explosion. Izuku raised his blade once more to block the incoming strike, before a massive hand grabbed onto Gilthunder's form. The young knight was so caught off guard by the action that he tried to use lightning to get the hand to let go, all before the hand slammed into the ground, giving the knight a serious case of a concussion before lifting him into the air to get a closer look at him. Diane, how about you send him away? Meliodas questioned as Diane smiled. With pleasure, Diane called out, before rearing her arm back. Unhand me, you wretched giant. Gilthunder growled as Diane thought about it. No, she replied before throwing the knight off into the distance. Izuku turned to the others before finding himself getting grabbed by Diane, the giantess holding onto his body as though she were struggling to remember something from the past. Izuku waited for her to make the attempt to do the same thing she'd done to Gilthunder, though he wasn't prepared for her to sniff him from the hair, causing him to blush massively from the action. That was until Diane smiled down at him. You smell like old Zaratros. Not only that, but you smell just like Princess Elizabeth. Diane called out. I was a student, but can you please drop me? We need to check up on Captain Meliodas. Izuku retorted as Diane allowed it. Ember, I thought we lost you to the forest. Elizabeth said, hugging him as tight as she could. I'm fine, Princess, though we should really be worrying about Captain Meliodas. Izuku retorted, before Meliodas walked forward a bit. Don't worry about me, I'm fine, Meliodas said, a smile on his face, before promptly falling down on his face, sparking a hilarious screaming match between Elizabeth and Diane. Sir Meliodas. No, my one true love. Deep in the countryside, a prison can be seen standing high above a small town. It has multiple windows, and appears to have been made of dirt, clay, and many other forms of bricks. We move towards the building as the inside of the dungeon's halls are dark, only lit by torches that hang from the walls that are covered in shadows. Deeper into the dungeon, we see a group of knights that are all sitting within a singular room. Each one has a different appearance, and while each has their own personality, there is a deep foreboding between each of them. Moving past them, in the deepest, darkest depths of the dungeon, a man can be seen. He has long hair, a really long, curly beard, and is seemingly as fit as a man who is his age can be, though it seems impossible. His hair is white in color, with crimson-red eyes as he stared towards the door with two knights standing guard on both sides of it. No words are stated from within the cell, as the two knights talk to one another in whispers. The prisoner watches them for a good long while, making sure to keep his ears stretched to the limit in order to hear what they speak about. Did you hear? The 7 deadly sins are making their appearance again, the knight on the left stated. Really? I thought they'd all be dead by now. I mean, aside from the one we're guarding. The knight on the right questioned. Yeah, from what I heard, Sir Gilthunder had attacked them and was defeated without any issues. The knight on the left informed. Didn't think that the sins retained their strength after 10 long years. The knight on the right cursed. Captain, the prisoner thought before he shrugged his shoulders. The sound of boots clopping on the floor within the hall could be heard. A young woman is seen rushing towards the office where the holy knights she is training under are all gathered around a small table. Her breathing is ragged and short, wanting nothing more than to give the information she has towards them. The holy knights she were going to inform were a small ragtag group called the Weird Fawn. They were a group of knights who were extremely well known for their uncanny ability to work together without any form of issues. Their ability to work in tandem with one another was something not many holy knights were capable of, each one sporting a magical ability of their own that was both curious, but at the same time very powerful in how they had trained it. The female knight broke through the door, shocking the knights as they were sharpening their blades as she panted heavily. The 7 deadly sins. They're coming here, the young female knight called out. What are you talking about, Jericho? The 7 deadly sins should all be dead at this point. One of the knights, a man covered in purple armor that had spikes on it, questioned. I know they're coming here. I got the news from Sir Gilthunder when he was near Vanya village. The now-named knight called out. The only sin who should still be alive is Ban, and he's in prison beneath our feet. But if you're correct in this news, I will head out to confront them myself. A feminine knight said, standing up. You're not going out there alone. I shall endeavor to head out there first. I have the perfect ability to see what we're working with before we conduct our attack. Another knight said, his gray armor glistening in the light before becoming translucent. As soon as the knight disappeared from sight, the other knights went about their roles, moving through the prison in order to get into an advantageous position to surprise the sins if they even reached the prison itself. Though they had to wonder, why were the sins coming in the direction of base prison? Surely, they didn't think that they could break the fox's sin of greed. Ban out from prison, right? Dalmari town, early afternoon. The sounds of clopping hooves slamming into the dirt can be heard outside Dalmari town. A giant pig is seen walking through the pathway leading to the town, and inside of the Boar Hat Tavern, Meliodas can be seen resting on his bed. Elizabeth is also seen sitting in a chair next to the bed as Diane looks through a nearby window, since she can't fit inside the Boar Hat Tavern at the moment. Izuku, however, was seen sitting on the edge of the room looking at his blade whilst polishing it from the previous fight he'd gotten into with Gilthunder. He was still thinking about what had happened in his fight against Gilthunder. The young knight was known to be far faster than the speed he'd used in the fight against Meliodas and himself. Hell, Gilthunder was faster than Izuku was. Izuku knew Gilthunder could have made the fight a lot harder, and the only reason why the fight didn't last longer was because Meliodas told Diane to throw Gilthunder away. Though that didn't stop Izuku from thinking about how the fight between himself and Gilthunder could have gone without the interruption of the sins. He was still worried about Gilthunder considering the fact that the young man was in a tough bind. He was protecting Margaret from the Holy Knights by working with them, but But at the same time, the problem was the simple matter that Gilthunder couldn't reveal his true intentions. The young knight was forced to fight them at full power, and he needed a fight to kill. Sighing to himself, Izuku stood upright and walked out of the room. Leaving Meliodas to the capable care of Elizabeth, Izuku left the Boar Hat Tavern as he watched Dalmari Town slowly get closer from a distance. Diane walked next to the tavern and Mama Pig, her head coming down to be level in height with Izuku's current positioning. "Do you have any plans for how we can help Captain Meliodas?" Diane asked, worry evident in her tone. "We'll need to contact a doctor within the town. And while we can't trust anyone in the town itself, I'll see about finding the next sin," Izuku said as Diane nodded. "What should Elizabeth and I do while you're gone?" Diane questioned. "You keep the princess safe. Meliodas can't do that as of right now. When Meliodas is cured of whatever issues he has at the moment, inform him where I've gone," Izuku said as Diane nodded again. "Stay safe, Ember," Diane called out as Izuku waved goodbye to her. After leaping off Mama Pig, Izuku whistled into the air, and out of the embers of the sun, a flaming horse appeared underneath him just as he landed on the horse's back and softly kicked their thigh in order to increase their pace. The flaming horse took off towards the town of Dalmari, leaving the Boar Hat Tavern and the others with Meliodas in order to keep him safe from any and all issues. It wouldn't take any longer than a few minutes to arrive within the town. Izuku had foregone wearing his Holy Knight armor, wanting to appear as a simple traveler searching for medicine and a doctor. Walking into what he believed was an office dedicated to medicine, he stepped towards the counter with a small bell sitting on it. Ringing the bell for whoever was inside the place, he found himself staring at a young woman. She was nice in her figure, though her hair was a bright brownish-orange color, and she wore glasses that really brought out the pink color of her eyes. Staying stoic in how he watched the young woman, Izuku spoke. "I came here looking for medicine and a doctor," Izuku said as the young woman nodded. "What happened? Are you hurt?" the young woman asked as Izuku shook his head. "No, but a good friend of mine was attacked by a monster bear from the forest nearby. The bear had nearly killed him, and with the little magic I know, I was able to stop the bleeding. But I need help," Izuku said, lying through his teeth. "Oh sure, I'll get my father to help you," the young woman said, rushing behind a door. For a good few long minutes, Izuku stood within the building, his eyes looking around the place for any signs of malpractice and struggle. He glanced around the main lobby of the building he was within as well. And while he couldn't see anything within the room, he could feel the presence of a Holy Knight masking their presence within the room itself. Turning towards a spot in the corner of the room, Izuku didn't walk towards the Holy Knight himself. He moved to take a seat next to where the Holy Knight was standing. He let the air around them become tense, wanting nothing more than to have the Holy Knight sweat from under his helm. Picking up a small booklet, Izuku began to read as his left eye glanced over at the Mirage standing next to him. While he wasn't aware of who was standing next to him, he had a working theory about which Holy Knight was in the room with him since he couldn't feel the man's presence. But he could feel the magic of a Holy Knight in the building. "You know, if you were trained harder, you might have been able to fool me," Izuku said, using flame magic to burn the spot next to him. A shriek left the Holy Knight standing next to him as he revealed himself. The knight was wearing a strange set of gray armor, though the weapon at his hip stayed there as the man glared down at Izuku through the eye holes of his helmet. "How did you know I was even there?" the knight questioned. "Just because I can't see you doesn't mean I can't sense your magical energy," Izuku said, glaring at the knight. The knight entered a combat stance. "You wouldn't happen to be one of the 7 deadly sins, would you?" "No, I'm not one of the 7 deadly sins. Though I will say, you seem to be slightly concerned," Izuku quipped as the knight glared harder. "No matter, I will make sure you don't leave this building alive," the knight said, pulling his blade out. Izuku stood still as the knight rushed towards him, leaping into the air, going for an overhead strike. Summoning his blade from the air itself, Izuku blocked the attack with ease, his eyes glowing with fire in them as he smirked. "I guess we'll be doing this the hard way," Izuku quipped. "Why, you're Ember, the Fire Holy Knight." The invisible Holy Knight called out, fearfully. The Boar Hat Tavern, 6 minutes before Izuku began to fight. As Izuku was searching Dalmari for any doctor and medications for Meliodas, the girls remained at the Boar Hat Tavern. They were trying to come up with ideas on how they could get Meliodas to wake up from whatever was ailing him. And while they knew that he could take any form of damage and be all right, they didn't know how much damage he could theoretically take before he'd die from his wounds. They came up with theories about how they could wake up Meliodas, even going to the point of which Elizabeth told the sleeping man that he could grope her all he wanted. None of it worked, though, as the two did their very best in order to try and get Meliodas to heal faster. They conversed with one another, finding out that while Elizabeth didn't have any feelings for the captain at the moment, they were both sure that the longer Elizabeth stayed with the captain, the more she'd find to like about him. It was also during this time of quiet and peace that the two of them were talking about the previous adventures that the 7 deadly sins went on. I still can't believe the captain was able to defeat Iskander as fast as he had. I was for sure thinking that Iskander was going to defeat him for sure, Diane said, dreamily staring at the captain. Well, the only kind of story I have is the one when I was growing up. My father had noticed that our enemies were looking at me for a potential hostage, and he decided to give me a bodyguard, Elizabeth said, moving a strand of her hair out of the way. And he gave you Ember, correct? Diane questioned. Yeah, from my current knowledge, he was trained by the late Zaratros himself. I wonder how powerful as a Holy Knight Ember really is. He hasn't even given me his real name as of yet, Elizabeth said, as Diane actually blinked at her. He hasn't told you his name? Diane asked, curious. Yeah, he only asked that I call him Ember. Nothing more, Elizabeth said, as Diane bit her lip. While she didn't know Ember's name either, at the same time, she really wanted to clobber him. What was the point of telling the princess to call him Ember when he had an actual name? That would make him sound more akin to a puppet rather than an actual human being. Diane voiced this in her confusion. Why would he want you to only call him by his Holy Knight title? That's akin to having himself appear as nothing more as a puppet. Diane questioned, her tone filled with concern. I asked the same thing, but he won't give me a reason, though I have seen him without his armor, Elizabeth said, as Diane blinked before gaining a lustful smile. Ooh, give me some details. While I did see him without that dreaded armor, I want to know what you saw, Diane said, as Elizabeth blushed slightly. Okay, so I had snuck around the castle late at night. I'm not sure Sir Ember noticed my presence, but I stumbled upon the room my father gave him. While I didn't see him in the bedroom itself, I heard the bath from the bedroom's hall, Elizabeth said, her face crimson. Come on, tell me more, Diane said, pumping her arms. You see dash, Elizabeth said, before the sound of an explosion interrupted the two's conversation. Crackle film. Both women moved away from the Boar Hat Tavern to look at Dalmari. And by the time the two left the immediate area where Meliodas rested, they saw smoke coming from Dalmari's town square. Glancing at one another, they gave a concerned look towards the town before making their way into it. Though, meeting a man who appeared to be in a hurry towards the Boar Hat Tavern, they were informed that he was a doctor and came to help a man named Meliodas. Initially on guard, the man stated that his name was Dr. Dana, and that he was originally sent to try and assassinate Meliodas through poison, but with Holy Knight Ember taking on Sergalgius, he could save Meliodas' life. Dana also told the two that they should also back up Sir Ember, seeing as how the Holy Knight protege of Zaratros was seemingly struggling against Sergalgius. The women didn't need any further prompting as they rushed towards the town. Hawk, the pig, was right on their tail as they all rushed to where the battle was taking place in the middle of Dalmari. Base prison, cell deep under the surface. Deep within the prison of Based, a man can be seen glancing up at the window. He could see a plume of smoke leaving up into the air, as he could only know one person who'd make such a ruckus nearby. Well, I guess I should leave then, the man said, standing up. The chains holding him to the wall immediately broke apart. The two knights on the outside of the door, staring at him in confusion before his arm broke through the metal door and grabbed one of them. The second knight immediately leapt away from the door as it was knocked down his ally unconscious on the floor next to the door as the man cracked his neck. He wasn't wearing a shirt, though his pants were ripped and revealed some slight muscle from his legs. He gave the knight a smirk before he held out his hand towards the knight, who immediately passed out from fear. "Huh, I was hoping for a good fight," the man said before stroking his beard. "If it's a fight you want, then it's a fight you'll get." A feminine voice called out, causing the man to turn around. "Huh, who are you?" the man questioned as the young woman growled. "You're going to remember the name, Holy Knight Apprentice Jericho," the young woman called out, rushing the man. She swiped her blade through the air in precise, diagonal strikes, the man letting out a scream of pain as her attacks landed on him, though no BLD seemingly fell from his body as he grumbled to himself, revealing him to be holding no injuries, though the beard and mustache on his face was no longer present. It was cut pretty perfectly, giving him the impression of a very handsome individual with a perfect jawline. He gave Jericho a smirk before holding his hand out to her, activating a secret ability that she didn't even know about. "Snatch," the man said, as his eyes seemingly glowed in the slightly dim hallway. Ban, the fox's sin of greed. He was arrested under the pretense that he destroyed the Fairy King's forest and killed the Fairy Queen. His ability Snatch allows him to take any weapon or power that his opponent has and adds it onto his own. It's been a long time since I last was placed in that cell. I don't fancy going back in there, though," Ban said, giving a smug expression on his face. "TCH, you'll not escape me," Jericho called out, rushing Ban again. The man quickly shut down her attempt at an attack on him. In 3 swift strikes to her stomach, chest, and chin, she was on the ground. He grabbed her by the chin as he lifted her up to his face. Though he gave a rather unimpressed smile, he spoke to her in a low but condescending tone. "Now, before I leave here, you should point me in the direction of a local armory," Ban said, staring into Jericho's eyes. "Like hell I'd tell you." Jericho grunted before Ban punched her in the stomach. "Final war dash," Ban warned, before feeling something behind him. SHNK. A spear found itself stabbing through his chest, and, as he coughed up some BLD, he heard the voice of one of the weird Fong Knights behind him. "Under orders from King Bartra III, you're being warned to return to your cell. Ban the Invincible," a knight said, as Ban turned around. "And if I don't play along?" "Knight," Ban questioned, as the man glared at Ban through his helmet. "There'll be hell to pay," the knight said, allowing Jericho to kick Ban in the GNDS. As the young man fell to his knees in pain, Jericho rushed down the hall, unaware she was leaving her superior all alone with a very deadly combatant, and while she ran, she'd hear the sounds of battle behind her. If one could even call it that, seeing as how Ban was easily capable of tanking the damage that the knight gave him and pierced through his chestplate armor, grabbing the knight's heart and crushing it between his palms. The knight would die in the hallway, unable to call for backup, as Ban turned towards the hall where Jericho had ran away. I guess I should go meet the captain. He should be on his way to get me out of here," Ban said, cleaning his ear as he walked down the hall. An explosion resounded across the entire street of Dalmari. Civilians who were walking out amongst one another turned their eyes to see a hole ripped out the side of Dr. Dana's clinic. A familiar gray armored individual landed with a few tumbles as he rolled into a kneeling position as another figure walked through the hole he'd made through destroying it. The figure wore a lot less armor, but the look on their face showed that they were what was supposed to be the kind of knights Sir Galgius represented. The civilians prepared to run away in fear of a possibility for one of the sins to appear when Sir Galgius called the individual out. "You're still alive, Holy Knight Ember," Galgius called out, fear lacing his tone. The action of calling out his opponent caused the people to stare in shock. From their knowledge, the Holy Knights have been known to take advantage of the people they were sworn to protect from any and all forms of danger. So to see one of the knights standing against one of their own made them feel as though Galgius was getting what was coming for him. Ember glanced around the area, locking eyes with a few of the civilians as he raised his sword towards Galgius, who pulled out his own barbed blade. The people of Dalmari had never heard the voice of Ember, considering the fact that he was the direct bodyguard of Princess Elizabeth. "You are a disgrace of a Holy Knight," If I were the current Grand Holy Knight, both your power and actions betray the title of Holy Knight. Ember growled out. Who are you to judge what a Holy Knight is? You betrayed us all. Galgius called out, with Ember retorting very quickly. I betrayed you all because you all started a coup against King Bartra. Your actions betray the title you so desperately cling to, and I will not allow one who calls themselves a Holy Knight use that very title for deeds of violent competence. Ember retorted, swinging his blade down on Galgius. The cowardly knight ducked under the attack, making the attempt to escape from the area using his invisibility magic, only for a hand to grasp onto his mask through the invisible magic and yank him into the ground before dragging it through the very dirt. A large divot is created from Ember, dragging his opponent through the ground as he drags the fight away from the town of Dalmari. Once away from any and all forms of innocent civilians, Ember stands over the now visible Galgius, who coughs up some BLD from having his face ground into the dirt through his helmet. Why you are a disgrace to us, Holy Knights. We are protecting Leoness from BSDRDS like YU. Galgius coughed out. I don't think you realize the situation you've found yourself in, Sir Galgius. Ember growled, lifting the knight up by the arm. As Galgius prepared to question Ember's statement, a swift swing of Izuku's left arm caused immense pain to the knight. Galgius let out a scream of utter agony as he fell to the ground, as BLD splattered into the dirt and caked it with his crimson color. A green flame found itself attaching to Galgius' wound as it cauterized the place as an armored arm fell to the ground, BLD still squirting out from the stolen appendage. A metallic greave slammed into the ground next to Galgius, as Ember stood over Galgius with his head and face blocking out the sun. A hand grabbed onto Galgius' other arm before fire magic had sliced through the shoulder. Galgius laid on the ground, forced to cry through the pain of having his arm stolen from him and his wounds cauterized before he could even make an attempt to reconnect his arms through magic. His right arm, covered in gray armor like his left, fell to the ground, the same thing meeting its sister appendage's fate as BLD squirted on the ground. Ember had no words as Galgius tried to use his magic to turn invisible, but he had neither the energy nor the concentration to even complete such a task. What's wrong, Galgius? Aren't you supposed to be the invisible knight of the Weird Fangs? The one impossible to track? Ember taunted as Galgius threw a frantic kick at Ember, who merely caught the leg. Why, you are a monster. Leave me alone. Galgius screamed in fear. Oh, no, I'm not going to leave you alone. You didn't leave the civilians alone. You even used the good doctor's daughter against the man. All for the simple mission of making Sir Meliodas die in his injured state. Ember retorted, pulling the leg off the body of Galgius. The BLD, curdling scream leaving Galgius' mouth was what echoed across the entirety of Dalmari. While the civilians were very happy that their landlords and abusers were getting what they were giving everyone else, it was kind of brutal. Ember spoke up again, this time the coldness in his tone being the only thing that Galgius would remember even in death. You call me a monster, but what do you call those who insistently pick on those who cannot protect themselves, huh? Ember growled, before pulling the other leg off of Galgius' body. This left the Grey Knight incapable of escaping from Ember's sight as well as magical sense. Even if the knight were to turn invisible and escape the area, he wouldn't get far because Ember could just place a small ember on his body in order to follow where he goes. He was like a turd, rolling down the street in search of a place to forever sit since he couldn't protect himself. Though Ember did have a point, what were the Weird Fangs if not a bunch of bullies who picked on those who couldn't defend themselves from people who trained every day in order to become as powerful as they currently were? Ember stood over the slowly calming body of Galgius as he raised his sword above his head. Green flames licked at the blade as he pointed it down at his opponent, who could do nothing in order to defend himself from his inevitable demise. Though Ember had the wherewithal to question Galgius one last time before he would inevitably kill him. Any last words, Sir Galgius? Ember questioned. HRGNN. Why you? You'll never beat the others. Ah ha 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 ha. Galgius yelled out, maniacal laughter leaving his mouth. The sound that came from Ember's sword slamming down into metal and flesh would forever stain Ember's mind. He was killing a man who had done everything he could to make other people's lives worse than it already was. He was too dangerous to be left alive. Though at the same time, Ember was putting down someone who could easily train himself to become a threat at a later point in time. But at the end of the day, his mission was to go deal with the weird Fong Knights, the very knights who were supposed to protect the people of Dalmari from any form of danger and destruction. BLD stained his green katana, and as he flicked it away from himself, he wiped the blade. Once the blade was free of BLD staining the blade, he pushed it back into its sheath on his hip before making his way towards Based Prison in the distance. The large prison looming in the background as though it were the next location for his fight with the weird Fong Knights. Though he could sense a power moving through the prison itself, and a smile appeared on Ember's face the more he noticed it resembled the fox sin of greed's magical energy. So the fox's sin of greed has escaped his cell? I guess he could sense Captain Meliodas, Ember said, smirking at the building as he continued down the path. Princess Elizabeth and Diane's point of view, Dalmari. Elizabeth was not one to look away from damage very lightly. She hated seeing things in disarray. So when she arrived at the building where Dr. Dana came from, with a hole through the side of the building, she immediately knew that something stopped Ember from completing his mission. Glancing up at the giant Diane, the tall woman could only stare in shock and horror at seeing the ground cratered not too far away from the wall. Moving over to the crater, it was actually Diane who had noticed the magical energy that was lingering in the crater as small embers of green flame hung about the area. "Hey, Princess," Diane questioned as Elizabeth moved forward. "What's wrong?" Elizabeth asked, concerned. "Your bodyguard, that Ember guy, what's his magical ability again?" Diane asked, her face showing a frown. "His magical ability is green fire, why?" Elizabeth asked, as Diane frowned further. "He caused this damage to the town, but from what it looks like he brought it away from Dalmari over there," Diane said, pointing in the direction a nearby divot created. "He must be in danger," Elizabeth called out. "Or he was the one who caused the damage by sending his opponent through the dirt," Hawk called out, finally catching up to the two of them. "Hawk, what are you talking about?" Elizabeth asked as Hawk huffed. "Don't you realize that your bodyguard can control green fire? And there's green, flaming embers all over the place in this crater? He made the damage because he was attacking someone strong enough to handle them," Hawk retorted, as Diane shook her head. "This is the territory of the weird Fong Knights. They're not really known for their power," Diane replied, causing Hawk to look up at her. "Then what are they known for?" Hawk asked, confused. "They're known for their deceitful actions, their manipulation magic as well as their coordination," Diane said, making her way towards the outer edge of Dalmari. Elizabeth and Hawk followed after her, not wanting to leave one of the 7 deadly sins alone. Not like they could even assist her in the saving of other people, since they would need saving if they were to ever get caught. The trio walked through the pathway made by the divot in the ground caused by Ember's rampage against his opponent, where they found torn limbs in specific locations. The fact that there were limbs laying on the ground a bit of a ways away from Dalmari caused Elizabeth to throw up behind a small bush nearby. Diane stared down at the dead body of Galgius, the knight wearing gray armor being only a torso and head. She knelt down and touched the grass that lay beneath his armor, feeling the crimson BLD that caked the ground around him. Elizabeth walked up to Diane, who was investigating the area, before looking over to the princess, who was staring at the dead body with what could only be seen as fear. "He's been dead for at least a few minutes. The blood's still fresh," Diane said, standing up. "Why would Ember do this? He's never been known to be so malicious." Elizabeth asked, confused and worried. "Has he ever told you about his past?" Diane asked, as Elizabeth shook her head. "Everything was on a need-to-know basis, so I have no clue about his past aside from having been trained by Sir Zaratros," Elizabeth said as Diane nodded. "If you were to compare his personality as your bodyguard back then compared to what it is now, what would you say?" Diane questioned, her eyes facing the direction where boot prints walked towards base prison. "I don't know dash." Elizabeth went to reply before being interrupted. "Dying. Die thing." The sound of small bell ringing was heard from nearby. A little boy who appeared to be a shepherd stood there looking at a dead body. His eyes were wide as he stared down at Galgius' dead form as Elizabeth and Diane pulled him away from the body. Walking away from the body, they were entirely unaware of the fact that, as they walked, the strange bell on his staff continued to chime. Further down the path, a holy knight wearing pink barbed armor stood behind a nearby tree. Ruin had sent her here in order to stave off the advance of Ember, as the man was slowly making his way towards the prison complex. They couldn't allow for a former holy knight, especially one as powerful as Ember, to pass by without suffering the consequences of his actions. They had felt the magical presence of Galgius disappear outside of the prison, but Jude's presence was still out there, and Ruin had gone to intercept the two women and Pig heading towards the prison as well. As the female holy knight stayed hidden behind a tree, she found herself staring at Ember as he walked up. His face was scrunched in a neutral frown as he glanced around the area. She had to hold her breath as the fallen knight walked by her hiding spot. As he paused in the middle of the clearing, she was sweating within her armor as he seemingly increased the temperature in the area for all but a few seconds before moving on. While she was sure that her bugs would annihilate him if he kept his guard down, the longer she stayed out here, the higher the chances were of him finding her. Taking a step out from her hiding spot, she called upon her locusts and roaches in order to attack Ember while he had his back to her. As the locusts and other bugs rushed towards Ember, she suddenly felt as though the air was being taken from her throat. She stood there, holding at her throat as a green gauntlet hung there, holding her from behind, squeezing around her airway. Through her armor, she looked behind her to find Ember standing there with a none-to-happy expression on his face as he slowly pulled her back to see who she was. "So, it seems I've come across you. Frisia, third in command to the Weird Fong Knights." Ember growled, though it strangely seemed to have a lustful tint to it. "What are you going to do to me?" Frisia questioned, though her breathing was lowered. "You see, I took out Galgius because he was a major threat. You're just going to be a thorn in my side if I just let you be, so I will give you one chance." Ember growled before dropping her to the ground. Ember stood above her, his form looming over her prone and fearful one. Her pink armor was covered in shadows as Ember's green eyes glowed in the shadow of the shade he stood within. And while some part of her felt very attracted to this new look for Ember, the rational side of herself immediately leapt to her feet and launched a flurry of sharp WHP strikes at him. The knight was very nimble on her feet as she ducked and dodged through large overhead swings and horizontal strike from her more powerful opponent as he slid in her guard multiple times. The only reason she was able to dodge death multiple times was due to her bugs saving her. Having created a body double of her made of roaches, ants, and locusts in order to allow her time to run. But each time, they would be burned to a crisp as Ember continued to slowly walk towards her as though he were some kind of horror movie villain. Not that she knew what a horror movie villain was. She sent another few whips strikes at him, something that he used his katana to block. Each time she tried to knock his weapon from his hands, his katana would feel as though it were as heavy as 3 of Ruin himself, and she wasn't able to take it from his grasp. So she decided to try and do as much damage to his blade as she swung her WHB around, creating a massive wall of lashing whips that moved almost as fast as the speed of sound. Her opponent watched the wall of WHP slashes as she laughed hysterically as she felt she had him on the back foot. "Try your hardest to get through my ultimate defense." "Locust barrier," Frisia called out as locusts surrounded her WHB slashes. "You really forgot who you were facing, didn't you?" Ember questioned, raising a palm towards her. What?" Frisia questioned, blinking in confusion. "Emerald Flaming Tiger Blast," Ember stated, as 2 flaming tigers rushed towards her whipping/barrier. As the 2 attacks connected to one another, the locusts and roaches soon became ashes, leaving her now burning WHB as it was slowly turned to ash up until it reached the RBB that held the rest of her WHP. It fell to the ground as the handle of her WHP also turned to ashes, leaving her without a weapon of her own to use against her opponent, who slowly walked up to her. Falling to her knees in horror, her mind played through countless simulations of how she could easily have killed him. But none had ever showed him being killed by her insects and magical power, because his power was the direct counter to her own. If she sent her beloved insects at him, they'd be cooked alive. If she had her beloved insects form a barrier around her, they'd be cooked alive, and she'd be cooked alive within their barrier. There was no feasible way for her to defeat her opponent right now, so she decided that in death she would rely on Ruin to be the defining factor of how they could defeat Ember and make sure they could kill him. Ember raised his blade over towards her neck, and he knocked the helmet off her head, revealing a rather appealing woman with curly blue hair and bright red eyes staring up at him. The fear in her eyes was palpable as she looked up at him. Her hands trembled at her hips as the blade just barely nicked her chin, causing a small amount of BLD to drip onto the dirt and sand. Just as the blade was about to reach up and behead her, her eyes closed in preparation for death, only for her to not feel death in this moment. And opening her eyes once more, she found that Ember was no longer present. It appears as though you have failed. You have fought well, my good ally, but your presence is no longer needed on this battlefield. Ruin's voice called out in her mind. Ruin? Where are you? How are you talking to me? Frisia called out mentally. You were always weak in comparison to us. You were just a mere lapdog, someone who we decided to endorse so that we could have a capable breeding stock should the time call for it. Ruin's voice said, his voice taking on a sinister tone. But I was stronger than G. Galgius. I at least landed a few blows to Ember. Frisia called out, though Ruin seemed to have enough of hearing her. Don't worry, the pain will be but momentary. The next time I see you, you shall receive your reward for holding off Ember, Ruin said, before ending the mental connection he had with her. When the mental communication between Frisia and Ruin was over, she opened her eyes. They were wide with fear, and her entire body was shaking with the fear beginning to overtake her entire body. Looking up at Ember, she found him actually hesitating to kill her. Maybe she could get on his good side, so she doesn't die. Ember, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I will leave you and the princess alone if you do something for me, Frisia said, looking at him with worry in her tone. You're scared. Someone is threatening you, Ember replied, lowering his blade for all but a moment. Why, yes. Ruin, he threatened me just now. He's going after Princess Elizabeth and the Serpent Sin of Envy. You have to save them. Frisia called out, fear overtaking her mind. What would I do about you? You've still caused destruction and chaos to the people of Dalmari. Ember retorted, why you may kill me when you deal with Ruin. I do not deserve to live for my actions against Dalmari, Frisia said, as Izuku fully lowered his weapon. I shall give you one chance, you may live. But if you squander this chance I have given you, then just know I will be coming for your head. Ember stated, his eyes glaring down at Frisia's red. Oh, of course. Why, you'll never see me again, that I promise. Frisia called out, running in the opposite direction of base prison. Turning in the direction he could feel Diane's presence, Izuku took a deep breath and walked in that direction. He could feel the presence of another Holy Knight near them both, and he couldn't allow the bestiarity to continue to use his illusion magic on them. And as he pulled out his magical fire, inside the prison of Base, the Fox's sin of greed found himself at the front gate of the prison complex. And stopping his escape was once again a young woman named Jericho. We really need to stop getting into a fight like this, Ban said, a grin on his face. I will not allow you to steal my dignity like this. You already humiliated me in front of my subordinates, you filthy pervert. Jericho yelled, attacking Ban. The soft crunching of sand beneath his boots were the things that brought reality back to the mind of one Midoriya, Izuku. The young knight found himself rushing across the desert back in the direction where he believed that Serpent Sin Diane and Princess Elizabeth were coming from. He knew that they would be following his tracks, And while Izuku knew that they were strong minus Elizabeth at the moment, he just wanted to protect the princess from any undue harm. The last of the Weird Fang Knights was a man who could manipulate the fears and frustrations of those around him, all because of a small bell on a staff he wielded. Izuku knew that Ruin would be the most dangerous of the knights, mainly due to his magical ability. He could create hallucinations of one's innermost demons, demons that would appear as though they are real and force those to fight one another. While on paper, it was a pretty cool magical ability. You could use it on your own enemies, and they would defeat each other before you were forced into fighting them in the hands of Ruin. He had worked HRD on the magical ability to make sure that one's own worst memories would come to the surface, and he'd use those people loved against them, just to get what he wanted. It was a very terrifying magical ability for someone to have, and Izuku needed to make sure that Princess Elizabeth and Diane didn't kill one another. His feet continued to push down further into the sand the further he got away from base prison. His eyes were seeing mirages over and over as he pushed through the desert, until he came across a sight that was both intriguing but at the very same time concerning. Ruin was standing between Princess Elizabeth and Diane as though they were best friends. The trio were looking happily as the bell chimed over and over between both of them. And while it wasn't loud enough to reach Izuku's ears, he knew it would be only a matter of time before they'd attack one another. So without any further prompting between the two girls, he leapt high into the air, using his fire magic to cause bursts of flame to fly out of his feet to further propel him towards Ruin. Behind his hair, his eyes were shadowed in darkness as he raised his blade high above his head in preparation for a fatal strike. Ruin must have noticed his flames beforehand as Izuku fell from the sky, because the man leapt back. This action from the man caused Elizabeth and Diane to blink in surprise as Izuku appeared between them with a shadowed expression on his face. His blade caught fire, emerald flames licking at the metal of the pommel before Izuku swung again for the man as he dodged and weaved through the attacks as much as he could. Eventually, however, Izuku had heard Elizabeth call out to him in a terrified tone of voice that he wouldn't ever wish for her to hear. "Ember, what are you doing? That's a little kid." Elizabeth called out, tears in her eyes. "What the hell? How could you attack a kid?" Diane called out, just as disgusted. "That's Ruin. He's using his bell to change your perception of him." Izuku growled out, his flames licking at the air. "My guy, that is just a kid." Hawk shrieked. Izuku ignored their words of confusion and fear as he continued to attack Ruin. The man was doing a good job of trying to appear as though he were nothing more than a weak child, calling upon the serpent Sin and Elizabeth to save him. But as the two stared at him, his magic was beginning to wane on their minds before Izuku landed a powerful kick to his stomach, launching him into the sand, dispelling his magic from the two women. Izuku slowly moved towards Ruin as the man was revealed in all his armor, his facial armor staring up at him with nothing more than complete disgust behind the helmet. "It appears as though my magic wore off thanks to you, Ember," Ruin said, his voice sounding deep but regal. "I knew it was you because of the chiming bell. Surrender now, and I might just let you live," Izuku said, entering a combat stance. "Don't think that this is over. Throughout your little attacks, my bell has been chiming. It's only a matter of time before you're going to suffer the consequences of allowing it to chime," Ruin said, entering a combat stance of his own. Both fighters stood across from one another as Diane and Elizabeth had to shake their heads to look at the man. He wore a strange set of armor that was within the realm of dark colors, maroon, black, gray, and a deep matte brown that covered the face. It didn't exactly help Ruin's case that the face he wore was one of indifference for the helmet's appearance. He swung his staff, holding his bell within the cross on the top, the bell chiming multiple times as Izuku felt his vision sway for a moment before he rushed the knight all on his own. His blade swung in a wide arc, swinging with the speed of a man on a mission. As soon as his blade's sharp edge slammed against the middle of Ruin's staff, a small shock wave of air blasted out from all around the two, a small gust of sand blasting around in a circle. Izuku pressed down on the blade before switching his grip to one of a reverse grip as he swung the blade upwards that was blocked before Izuku stabbed his blade in a piercing motion. Ruin was forced to place the top of his staff around Izuku's blade in order to try and wrench it from his grip, and while it worked, it left him open for an open palm strike to the stomach. The resulting shockwave blasting out from his back launched him backwards across the sands. Izuku took 3 steps towards the fallen knight Ruin, staring down at the staff holding the chiming bell. Picking up the staff, Izuku stared at the bell before he tore it from the staff itself and crushing it between his palms, uncaring if the small metal shards broke through the skin of his hand. As BLD mixed in with the bell as it chimed against the broken pieces of the bell itself, Izuku felt his surroundings change as he was replaced with figures surrounding him. Visions/hallucinations outside base prison. Izuku found himself standing in the middle of a classroom, his eyes having been dull for a long time. Staring around the classroom itself, he could only view those around him as figures of dark colors of black and gray, each one more terrifying than the last. Izuku was about to voice what was going on when he noticed the door to the classroom open up, revealing a man who wore a teacher's uniform. Something that had Izuku reeling, because he knew what this was. This was replaying events from the final day of his life before heading into the world he came to through reincarnation. Gritting his teeth for the upcoming events, he couldn't stop them as they came in. Swift succession. It started with his classmates talking about entrance exams for high schools in the area. Then it moved to a boy with ash blonde hair, something that his brain immediately named Kakin, as he boasted about having aced the mock exams for UA. When it was stated by his teacher that Kakin was going into the UA Heroics department of UA, the students within the classroom called out about how hard that was. Kakin then went into a tirade about how he'd be stronger, faster, better, and richer than All Might by the time he reaches the rank of #1 in the world. Then the teacher called Izuku's own paper that said he'd be trying out for UA. Needless to say, what happened next was to be expected at this point. Kakin, though he would rather prefer to call him Bakugo now, attacked him without remorse, the young man blasting him out of his seat with an explosive palm strike to his desk. When he fell to the ground, Bakugo moved towards him in a slow, stalking fashion as he stood before him, as everyone in the room gained crimson-colored eyes, Squire and all. Bakugo stood at the front of them as he called him out openly. "What makes you think that you can enter UA, Deku? You're quirkless." Bakugo growled, his face in a measured, smiling scowl. They got rid of that rule, Kakin. I can still at least try." Izuku's voice echoed into the room. "Midoriya, getting into UA? That's a fat dream. If he thinks that he can get in there without a quirk, then he's got another thing coming. I think it'd be better if he was kicked out before taking the exams. The proctors have got to be stupid if they allow worthless Deku in there." Izuku felt a small burst of rage filter through his veins, hearing those words again. While it wasn't something he wanted to hear, it was something he was forced to hear from his peers because of what happened before he broke the bell. The scene changed again. Only this time Izuku found himself all alone in the classroom. Though it wasn't as entirely quiet as it should have, with him being the only one present. Bakugo and his 2 classmates who sucked up to him walked around the desks towards him. Their eyes were still covered in crimson colors as they sneered down at him. On his desk was his latest notebook, something Izuku wanted to desperately protect. But before he could even place his hand over the notebook, one of the 2 boys with Kakin grabbed the notebook and sneered at the boy. "Hey, Kakin, look at this." One of them called out. Izuku remembers he had a quirk that extended his fingers. "Huh? Hero analysis for my future? Deku, what the F have I told you about this? Nobody is going to listen to your stalker notes." Bakugo growled angrily. "Hey, give that back." Izuku stuttered out, reaching for the notebook. Bakugo held the notebook above his head as Izuku attempted to reach for it. Though, what happened afterward was the slightly taller boy shoving Izuku back and placing the notebook between his palms and destroying the notebook in question. It was burned from top to bottom, and while in this state, it could be salvageable. The young man then tossed the notebook outside the window that was wide open. Izuku made to grab it from the window as Bakugo and his bully friends walked towards the door of the classroom, and he heard some words that would give courage to Izuku's mind later on in that very day. There might be a way for you to become a hero, but Kugo's voice echoed within the classroom. Izuku distinctly remembers, looking at the boy with hope, a small hope that he'd actually give him the advice needed to become a hero. But he would be wrong. Pray you get a quirk in your next life and jump off the roof. Maybe then you'll be able to be a hero. But Kugo called out as he walked out of the classroom, all with a sadistic grin on his face. Desert outside base prison, moments after Ruin's defeat. Princess Elizabeth and Diane alongside Hawk could only watch on in bafflement as Izuku paused. He just stared at his palm with nothing more than a complete ignorance of the world around him. The sound of armor grinding against one another was heard, garnering the two women and Hawk's attention. Ruin was standing upwards now, a hand now cradling his stomach as he slowly walked over to where Izuku stood all alone with his eyes being shadowed. The man began to laugh hysterically as he managed to do something that none of the other Holy Knights could achieve. He'd managed to get the Holy Knight Ember to stop stoking his own flames. To think that final chime was all that was needed to force him to pause. Ruin said, his voice echoing with a regal hardness. What did you do to him? Elizabeth called out. I did nothing. He rang that final chime. He's now suffering a pain that is exclusive to him. I made this spell to keep him in such a state that he needs to ride it out. The only way to break free from that spell is to let it run its course. Ruin said, his voice sounding triumphant. So you mean to say that Ember is stuck like this? Diane asked, concerned. Most assuredly, he will break free soon. But now that he's paused, this gives me a chance to kill him right where he stands. Ruin said, pulling out a rather short knife. Covering the blade itself was a strange purple fluid, and the girls immediately realized what this was. Poison. Ruin rushed towards Izuku's position. Behind his helmet, a sadistic smile on his face as he ran towards his frozen opponent. He raised the knife in the air. Ruin prepared to slam it into the lowered guard of Ember before he felt something smash into his armor from the front. Looking down, he found Hawk head-butting him in the stomach where Izuku had kicked him, and while it was a commendable effort, he was unaware of the arm coming around from his left. He raised a leg and kicked Hawk away, the small pig squealing in pain and fear as he was knocked away. Elizabeth had grabbed a rock from earlier and swung her arm in the direction of Ruin. The man looking to her in the last moment as the rock ground itself against his helmet, doing exactly no damage as the man just stared at her with disappointment behind the mask's eyes. He was about to backhand the princess when a fist slammed into his entire body, knocking him away and forcing his hand to drop the poison knife. He bounced across the desert before slamming into a dead tree. He felt his vision swim from the sudden force of the stop before finding a large shadow looming over him. Looking up, he found Diane standing above him, her eyes filled with rage. Time to die, Diane screamed, slamming her foot down on him. Ruin had no chance to move, not while he was concussed and already sporting a broken rib from Izuku's kick from earlier. BLD splattered on the ground beneath Diane's foot as she shuddered at the feeling of a crushed human being beneath her boot. As she stepped away from the crushed form of Ruin, the armor flattened into the sand and creating a small BLD trail from his body to where the two women were walking. Elizabeth rushed over to Izuku as the young man just continued to stare down at his palm with nothing more than a blank expression on his face. Ember? Ember? Ember, answer me! Elizabeth called out, shaking his shoulders. Ember, Diane called out, waving a hand in front of Izuku. Demon, it seems like killing the person who created the spell didn't work. Hawk grumbled. So we're supposed to just wait this out? Elizabeth asked, concerned. I guess so. It's going to take Captain a few minutes to get out here anyway, Diane said as she sat down on the sand. Yo, a familiar voice called out next to her. Kaiya, Diane called out, her body turning white. Standing next to her was Meliodas, as the man looked like nothing ever happened to him. Sir Meliodas, Elizabeth gasped out loud. What took you so long? Aren't you immune to most damage? Hawk questioned as Meliodas giggled. Not really. Gilthunder did a lot of internal damage that my body was just recovering from. Meliodas said, shrugging. Wow. Anyway, how are we going to get Ember out of that trance? Hawk questioned. What trance? Meliodas questioned with a frown. Ruin. He had this strange bell on his staff. Ember broke it in his palm. But ever since it chimed one last time after it was broken, he's been stuck in a trance. Diane explained as Meliodas nodded. Ah, that's a spell at work. He's got to let it run through, otherwise he's going to be mentally screwed up. Meliodas said, with a frown. Hallucinations/visions of the past. Izuku finds himself in a new scene. He'd long since watched the events leading him to this meeting. How he walked towards an underpass that was extremely familiar. He'd attempted to stop the vision from continuing, but he failed miserably, mainly because of the fact that he couldn't change the past. He was stuck to watch his younger self be attacked by the Sludge Villain before All Might appeared to save his life. Then the man defeated the villain with such a fast speed that Izuku's current self was only able to keep up with it because now the man was gathering the pieces from the ground. He watched as the hero picked up the burned and waterlogged notebook with such care it was almost unheard of. The man gingerly opened the notebook and read the notes as though he were reading a small book, and while the words were smudged due to the water and burns, he was actually impressed. If the confused expression on his hero's face showed anything, it meant that the man was genuinely impressed with the contents of the notebook. Izuku would then watch as the man found a clean page to write his hero name on 2 pages just as his younger self woke up. The events leading to this very rooftop he found himself on were comedic, if anything. Izuku waking up, meeting All Might, finding out the man already gave his autograph all the way to them landing on the roof because his past self needed validation. A validation that he'd never gotten from the moment he was diagnosed as quirkless, as though it were a disease that would be passed on to anybody if they got too close. Don't ask him, please. Don't ask him. Izuku thought to himself as his younger self pleaded with the hero to hear him out. All Might, seek in someone like me, as someone without power, become a hero like you. His youthful self called out, his eyes closed and hands clenched at his hips. Izuku watched as All Might paused at the railing. He'd been just about ready to jump before glancing back. His dark ocean blue eyes staring at the boy before him. The boy small and scrawny in appearance, but with a pure heart of gold. How far that boy had gone in order to become the very person he was today. Izuku felt his gaze slowly fall down to his feet as he prepared to hear the man speak those harrowing words. He then watched as how the man slowly shrunk in size, smoke appearing around him as his younger self talked about how he was treated to the man. It was actually kind of funny how his younger self never noticed how All Might seemed to be shrinking before him. And by the time he saw the shorter, scrawny All Might before him, the boy shrieked and called him out as a faker. Only for All Might to give a brief explanation of why he looks the way he does, before showing the hard crater of a scar on his left side. Multiple colors revealing themselves around the crater of a scar that represented the loss of half his respiratory system, all from a single attack from a man who wasn't stronger than him, but was most assuredly smarter. Can one become a hero without a quirk? No, I should think not. All Might said, his visage becoming slightly more demonic. His heroic appearance, the one thing that Izuku held in his heart as the purest form of heroism, slowly began to morph into that of a demonic spirit, his visage and face appearing monstrous in looks as he stared up at the boy from where he sat. Izuku could already feel his younger heart breaking at the words, but the man needed to continue and further validate Izuku's reasoning for dying. You could become a police officer or a firefighter. They get a lot of flack for not catching the villains, but it's still a respectable job. It's all right to dream, young man, but sometimes you have to be realistic with the kind of job profession you are seeking. All Might said, moving to leave. Izuku watched as his younger self could only stare out into the distance as All Might left him on the rooftop. He could see his younger self debating whether or not to leave after the hero, just in a matter of getting home as fast as he could to mourn the death of his dream. It was in that moment that Izuku had realized at the time that the saying of never meet your heroes actually held its true meaning. Meeting All Might before that question was asked was something Izuku treasured for the rest of his life. Even if it was short, but hearing those words from his hero, it broke something in him. It broke the spirit of his dreams as a hero. The heroic spirit within his very soul cracked, split apart, before fading into nothing. That's when more words filtered through the air around himself and his younger self. Midoriya, getting into UA? That's a fat dream. If he thinks that he can get in there without a quirk, then he's got another thing coming. I think it'd be better if he was kicked out before taking the exams. The proctors have got to be stupid if they allow worthless Deku in there. Pray you get a quirk in your next life and jump off the roof. Maybe then you'll be able to be a hero. His younger self felt a tremble move through his entire body, as though a shiver rushed down his spine. Without any further thoughts, nor the awareness of hearing to notice an explosion happening in the distance, his younger self stepped towards the edge of the building. Izuku felt his eyes tearing up at the sight, his younger self having given up on his chance at life in order to achieve the dream he'd always wanted. His arms grabbed onto the railing as he hauled himself onto the other side of the railing itself, and Izuku's present self rushed over. While he loved the time he'd spent in this new world, he had always regretted his decision to jump. It was one of the biggest demons he held in his mind, the action that brought him into the world and began his journey as a Holy Knight. All started from this boy preparing to jump. He wrapped his arms around his younger self, the boy sobbing loudly. Tears ran down his cheeks as he trembled from the cold of the evening beginning to set in, his arms trembling from the weight of all his burdens beginning to weigh too much. Izuku's arms wrapped around his younger self's form, and while his younger self couldn't feel the warmth that he was trying to provide, it gave his younger self a reason to pause. Mom, I know that you'll think that I'm the reason I'm doing this, but I hope you can grow to move on from this. It's not your fault. The fault all lays on my shoulders for not having been born with a quirk. Izuku's younger self muttered, and without anyone to stop him, Izuku's younger self leapt off the roof, his arms spreading wide as he felt the wind rush past him and reaching terminal velocity within mere seconds. The ground closed in as Izuku's present self splayed out next to his younger self. He wrapped his arms around his younger self, bringing the smaller, more fragile boy into his chest as he sobbed with both relief and sadness and regret. Before the sounds of hitting the ground ended the vision/hallucination. Base prison, front gate, with Meliodas and the others. Meliodas and the others stood outside of base prison. Their expressions were grim as Diane held onto Izuku between her palms, and while she was concerned with the tears falling from his eyes. There was nothing they could do until his hallucinations and prison visions would end. The group stared up at the massive gate that stood before them all, looming over the group as though there were larger threats hidden deep within the prison itself. "Why did we come here again, Sir Meliodas?" Elizabeth asked, concerned. "There's someone who was captured and brought here, all because of a broken law that happened before he even became a sin. We're here to break him out, if he hasn't done that already himself." Meliodas retorted with a cheeky smile. "What about Ember? He's been silently crying for the last 10 minutes. Diane questioned, worried. The vision or hallucination he's suffering from has got to be terrible. I don't wish that on anyone else, but if he made it to the rank of a Holy Knight, he'll be capable of coming back from such an attack," Meliodas said, fully trusting in Izuku's inescapable stubbornness. They were about to break the door down when the very door fell down from the inside out. Once they moved out of the way, both the figure who knocked it down and Meliodas stared at one another for a good long while. Neither one said anything until the white-haired individual smiled at the captain and began to bounce up and down happily, raising his arms above his head and calling out to him. "Captain!" The man called out. "Ban!" Meliodas called out, as Elizabeth blinked in confusion at the sight. What happened next was what caused Diane and Elizabeth to stare on in both annoyance and quiet intrigue. Meliodas and Ban would then begin to play pat-a-cake with one another, knocking the other into the building and begin to break apart the entire prison itself. As the walls of the prison fell apart, burying the two individuals inside without hurting any of the knights within the building itself, the two popped out and continued to play pat-a-cake with one another. While that was happening, Izuku came out of his vision/hallucination given to him by Ruin. His hair was matted with sweat as his eyes looked darker and filled with such a hidden sadness that only Diane was able to pick up on the small, sad aura surrounding him. She lifted him up before seeing the saddened expression on his face, before softly lowering him to the ground so he could walk on his own. This action garnered Princess Elizabeth's attention as she went to worry hard about Izuku, who was completely ignoring her presence, not that the princess even cared. "Captain, why are you working with a Holy Knight?" Ban questioned from afar. "Don't worry, that's Ember. He's on our side. He's helping the princess find each of us sins." Meliodas retorted with a wink and smile. "If you're sure, has he been useful to you?" Ban questioned, a little suspicious. "Of course. He makes sure that I don't grope the princess." Meliodas happily stated, as Ban sighed. "Well, I guess I can be the cook again." Ban quipped as Meliodas chuckled. "Never said you couldn't." Meliodas happily chuckled in return. "That makes 3 of the 7 sins. Can I really save Britannia at this rate?" Elizabeth thought to herself as she watched her bodyguard of a knight solemnly stay as far away from the group as possible. This marks the end of part 1 of What If Deku Had the 7 Deadly Sins powers. A big thanks to NINJ45 Word for granting the permission to feature this amazing fanfiction. Please like the video and subscribe to Deku Universe for more interesting stories. Thank you and see you soon.